My husband said this Saturday all 10 members of my family are staying at our house for 2 weeks. I replied, I just had major spine surgery. Please postpone it until next weekend. He said coldly, no one is waiting. Just do as I say. But when they arrived, treating my home like a hotel and me like the maid, they had no idea I had already set a trap that would leave them freezing broke and begging for mercy. My name is Gillian, 34 years old, and I work as a senior director of mergers and acquisitions at a venture capital firm in Manhattan. Grab this paper towel and clean up that vomit in the hallway right now. The voice of my husband, Gavin, echoed sharply against the vaulted ceilings of our Tudor-style home. He tossed a roll of cheap paper towels directly into my lap, the cardboard core hitting the armrest of my wheelchair. His 10 relatives just flew in from Chicago. Everyone is exhausted. Stop pretending to be paralyzed in that wheelchair to get out of hosting. I told you yesterday to reschedule your surgery. You deliberately defied me just to avoid cooking for my mother. I looked up at him. Blood was still seeping through the fresh gauze on my lower back from the L4-L5 spinal fusion surgery I endured exactly 5 days ago. Tricking my doctors, I repeated my voice eerily calm despite the throbbing pain shooting down my legs. The neurosurgeon explicitly stated that delaying the procedure another week would cause irreversible nerve compression. I would have been permanently paralyzed from the waist down. And you call that pretending? Stop the theatrics, Gillian! Gavin snapped aggressively, loosening his silk tie. My mother is exhausted. The entire family will be staying here for 2 weeks. Stand up, walk to the kitchen, and start preparing a proper dinner. Do not embarrass me in front of my parents. Before I could formulate a response to his sheer audacity, Patricia, my mother-in-law, pushed through the heavy oak front door. She was followed by 8 other people, all dragging mud-encrusted suitcases and wet winter boots across my custom $10,000 Persian wool rug. This sofa feels like a rock. Patricia complained immediately, tossing her knockoff designer handbag onto the tempered glass coffee table with a loud clatter. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust. Gavin, I am taking the master bedroom. My sciatica is acting up and I absolutely refuse to sleep on those cheap guest mattresses. Tell your wife to pack her things and move to the basement. I need peace and quiet to recover from the flight. Right behind her, Brittany, Gavin's younger sister, strolled in, loudly chewing a piece of gum. She headed straight for my kitchen and yanked the refrigerator door open. Seriously, there is literally nothing to eat in here. Sister-in-law, do you plan on starving us? What is the Wi-Fi password? Make yourself useful and order us some premium sushi right now. Terrence, Brittany's husband, stepped inside, carefully wiping his shoes on the welcome mat. He was a tall, broad-shouldered African-American man with a kind face, and he immediately frowned at his wife. Brittany, knock it off, Terrence said, his deep voice carrying a tone of strict reprimand. Gillian just had major surgery. Cannot you see she is in a wheelchair recovering? Have some basic respect for her home. I will order some pizzas for everyone using my own card. Leave her alone. You do not know anything, Terrence. Brittany rolled her eyes, crossing her arms defensively. Gavin told us she just got some minor liposuction done on her stomach because she is insecure. Women who are so obsessed with their vanity that they neglect their hosting duties do not deserve sympathy from anyone. I gripped the armrests of my wheelchair, my knuckles turning white. Minor liposuction. My treacherous husband had spun a completely fabricated story to villainize me to his family, covering up the fact that he was the reason my back was ruined in the first place. Is that so? I smiled, a frosty expression that instantly lowered the temperature in the room. Gavin, did you tell them I was getting liposuction? Or did you conveniently leave out the part where you forced me to cancel my premium health insurance 2 years ago because you needed that money to fund your fake tech startup? You made me suffer through agonizing back pain with no treatment just so you could play entrepreneur. And did you tell them about 3 months ago when you shoved me down the stairs after I caught you transferring $40,000 from our joint savings to your 22-year-old assistant? The living room fell dead silent. The chewing sound from Brittany stopped completely. Terrence stared at his brother-in-law in absolute shock. What kind of lies are you spewing? Gavin's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He lunged forward, raising his hand as if he were about to strike me across the face. Shut your mouth right now! Before his hand could even come close to my cheek, a towering man in a black suit stepped out from the hallway shadows and effortlessly caught Gavin's wrist mid-air, twisting it back with trained precision. It was the private security guard I had hired that morning. Step away from my client immediately, the guard growled, shoving Gavin backwards so hard he stumbled into the console table. Patricia shrieked, clutching her chest dramatically. Have you lost your mind, Gillian? You hired a thug to assault your husband in his own home. You are just a pathetic orphan. If my son had not taken pity on you and let you live in this $3 million mansion, you would be on the streets. You owe us everything. His own home. I laughed aloud, ignoring the sharp sting in my spine. I reached into the side pocket of my wheelchair, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and threw them onto the glass coffee table right next to Patricia's fake bag. Mother-in-law. Before you claim my property, you should ask your precious son to check his banking app. See if he even has $500 to pay the heating bill this month. Gavin stared at the folder, his eyes darting frantically. Gillian, what did you do? I am a senior director of mergers and acquisitions, Gavin. I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Did you really think you could secretly forge my signature to take out a $300,000 loan against this house to buy cryptocurrency without me finding out? I submitted every single piece of evidence of your financial fraud to the Federal Bureau of Investigation last Monday. But I did not stop there. I pulled out my phone. With 3 simple taps on my smart home application, the electronic locks on the master bedroom upstairs engaged with a loud, definitive click sealed by my biometric fingerprint. Another tap, and the digital thermostat for the entire house powered down completely. The winter air outside was freezing, and soon the inside would match it perfectly. Finally, I disabled the Wi-Fi network, cutting off their access to the outside world. You want to stay here? I said, looking at the stunned, horrified faces of the invaders standing in my foyer. Fine. Enjoy the freezing temperatures and absolutely no internet. The master bedroom is locked indefinitely. If anyone tries to break that door, the police will be here in exactly 3 minutes. Welcome to my house. The digital display on the wall control panel went entirely black, plunging the house into a chilling quiet. Outside, a brutal New York snowstorm was already dumping inches of snow onto the driveway. Without the central heating system pumping warm air through the vents, the temperature inside my sprawling Tudor mansion began to plummet rapidly. I smoothly navigated my wheelchair away from the foyer and headed straight toward the secluded guest suite on the ground floor. I locked the heavy oak door securely behind me. I managed to ease my aching body onto the firm mattress I had specifically ordered for my surgical recovery. By midnight, the house had turned into an absolute icebox. The pristine marble floors that Patricia loved so much were now radiating a biting cold that seeped right through their designer socks. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. I listened to the muffled sounds of chaos echoing from the hallway. Gillian, open this door right now! Brittany screamed. Her fists pounded violently against the wood of my guest room door. She kicked the bottom panel, her voice shrill with entitlement and rage. Are you insane? It is literally freezing out here. My toes are turning blue and my mother is shivering in the living room because you locked us out of the master suite and turned off the heat. Turn the furnace back on before I call the police on you for elder abuse. I pulled the thick heated blanket higher up to my chest. The portable generator I had installed in this specific room was working perfectly. It kept me completely warm and comfortable. I did not bother answering her. Her threats were as empty as her husband's bank accounts soon would be. Brittany, stop acting like a lunatic and step away from the door. The deep, exhausted voice of Terrence rumbled through the hallway. I heard the heavy thud of his footsteps approaching, followed by the sound of him pulling his wife away from my room. You are acting like a spoiled brat. This is her house and she just had major spine surgery. Do you have any idea how much pain she is in right now? Do not you dare defend her, Terrence! Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing off the frozen walls. She is doing this on purpose. She is a vindictive, barren woman who just wants to make everyone else as miserable as she is. A sharp silence fell over the hallway. Even through the thick wooden door, those words hit me with the force of a freight train. Baron. That was the label they had secretly stamped on me. "You know what, Gillian?" Brittany yelled, stepping closer to the door again, her voice dripping with pure venom. "Maybe it is a good thing you lost that baby 2 years ago." Terrence gasped. "Brittany, what is wrong with you?" "No, let me speak." Brittany continued, her voice echoing with toxic cruelty. God knew exactly what he was doing. Why would he give a child to a cold, calculating, selfish woman who treats her own husband and his family like garbage? You locking us in the freezing cold just proves it. That miscarriage was not a tragedy, Gillian. It was karma. You deserve to be empty. My breath caught in my throat. My hands curled into tight fists under the warm blanket. 2 years ago, when I was completely blinded by my love for Gavin, I had gotten pregnant. But because Gavin insisted on taking a spontaneous ski trip to impress his wealthy college friends, he forced me to carry all his heavy gear through the lodge while he networked. I slipped on a patch of ice. I lost my baby that same night in a rural emergency room while Gavin was busy drinking craft beer at the resort bar. He told his family I had been careless. He told them I was clumsy. He never told them he was the one who handed me 3 heavy duffel bags while I was carrying his child. "Get out of the hallway, Brittany!" Terrence growled, his voice vibrating with genuine disgust. "Go downstairs right now." I heard the sound of her stomping away, muttering curses under her breath. A few seconds later, a soft, hesitant knock tapped against my door. "Gillian, it is Terrence." He spoke quietly. "I am so sorry for what she said. That was completely out of line and unforgivable. I found a portable thermos in my bag. I poured some warm water for you. I will just leave it right here by the door in case you need to take your medication. Please just get some rest." I stared at the door in the dark. Terrence was the only one in that family who possessed a shred of human decency. It was a shame he was married to a parasite. From the floor above, a loud metallic banging noise suddenly shattered the midnight quiet. Gavin was furious. He had spent the last 2 hours trying to figure out how to override the smart home system, but my security protocols were completely impenetrable. Realizing he could not access the luxurious master bedroom, he had resorted to brute force. "I am not sleeping on the cheap sofa," Gavin shouted from the top of the staircase. "I am the man of this house. If she will not open the door, I will break it down myself." Through my security application on my phone, I watched the live feed from the hallway camera. Gavin had actually called a 24-hour emergency locksmith. A burly man in a heavy winter coat was standing in front of the master bedroom door, holding a heavy-duty commercial power drill. "Just drill right through the biometric scanner," Gavin ordered, shivering in his thin designer sweater. "I do not care what it costs. I will pay you double. Just get this door open so my mother can sleep." The locksmith hesitated, but eventually raised the heavy drill. As soon as the metal drill bit made contact with the reinforced casing of the biometric lock, a deafening high-pitched siren erupted throughout the entire mansion. Flashing red and blue strobe lights activated in every single hallway. "What did you do?" Patricia screamed from downstairs, covering her ears. The smart lock was wired directly to a commercial-grade anti-burglary system. Any attempt to physically tamper with the lock instantly triggered a Level 1 security breach protocol. Before Gavin could even yell at the locksmith to stop, the loud, authoritative blare of police sirens wailed from the street outside. Red and blue lights reflected off the snow-covered windows of the living room. Because the alarm was registered as a home invasion in progress at a high-net-worth property, the local police department had dispatched 3 squad cars immediately. Heavy, frantic pounding shook the front door. "Police department, open the door right now and step away from the lock," a booming voice commanded from the front porch. I lay in my warm bed, listening to the sheer panic erupting outside my room. Gavin was about to learn that playing the victim is incredibly difficult when you are caught red-handed trying to break into a heavily secured room in the middle of a freezing winter night. The flashing lights from the 3 squad cars illuminated the falling snow in alternating shades of stark red and electric blue. Two heavily armed officers were already standing on the front porch of my Tudor mansion, their flashlights cutting through the freezing winter night. I lay perfectly still in my heated guest bed, watching the live security feed on my phone screen as complete chaos erupted on the second floor. Gavin, who had been shivering in his thin designer cashmere sweater just moments ago, was now practically vibrating with panic. He scrambled down the stairs, nearly tripping over the plush carpet runner. The commercial locksmith he had hired was frozen in place, holding a heavy-duty power drill, staring at the blaring alarm system like a deer caught in headlights. "Police department, open the door right now and step away from the lock." The booming voice of the lead officer commanded again, pounding a heavy fist against the solid oak front door. Gavin rushed to the foyer, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender, before he even unlocked the deadbolt. "Officer, there is a misunderstanding," he stammered, pulling the door open to a blast of freezing wind. "This is my house. I live here. My wife is inside and she is having a severe mental health crisis." She locked herself in a room and turned off the heat. The lead officer, a stern-looking man with snow dusting his dark uniform, did not lower his stance. He stepped into the foyer, his hand resting casually but firmly on his utility belt. "If this is your house, sir, why did a commercial anti-burglary system dispatch an emergency signal indicating an active breach on the master suite doors? And why is there a locksmith standing at the top of your stairs with a drill?" Before Gavin could weave another one of his fabricated stories, Patricia rushed down the stairs, wrapping a thin decorative throw blanket around her shivering shoulders. "Officer, my son is telling the truth," she cried out, her voice trembling from the cold. "My daughter-in-law is completely unhinged. She is addicted to heavy painkillers from a recent surgery, and she has lost her mind. We are just trying to get into the bedroom to get her some help." I watched the screen, my expression hardening. They were setting the stage. Gavin was not just trying to avoid embarrassment. He was actively laying the groundwork to declare me mentally incompetent. If he could convince the authorities that I was abusing narcotics and suffering a psychotic break, he could apply for an emergency psychiatric hold. And with a medical power of attorney, he would have unchecked access to all my financial assets, including the very house he was currently freezing in. The officer looked skeptical, glancing between Gavin, Patricia, and the locksmith. "Where is your wife right now, sir?" "She is locked in the guest suite on the ground floor." Gavin lied smoothly, pointing down the hallway toward my door. "She is heavily medicated. I just wanted to get into the master bedroom so my elderly mother could have a decent place to sleep, but my wife has changed all the security codes in a paranoid delusion." I needed to act before Gavin could spin his narrative any further. I picked up my phone and dialed the local precinct's non-emergency dispatch number, a line I had saved specifically for situations involving my high-security residents. "This is Abigail Henderson, the registered owner of the property at 4500 Ridgeview Drive." I spoke clearly and calmly, ensuring my voice betrayed zero signs of the distress Gavin was claiming I had. "Your officers are currently in my foyer responding to an alarm. Please inform them that I am the sole owner of this property and I am safe inside my locked guest suite. The man claiming to be my husband is currently under investigation for financial fraud, and I triggered the alarm because he hired an unauthorized individual to drill into my secure master suite, which contains sensitive corporate documents." The dispatcher verified my security PIN and immediately relayed the message via radio. I watched on the camera feed as the lead officer touched his earpiece, his expression shifting from skeptical to strictly professional. "Mr. Henderson," the officer said, his tone instantly losing any trace of leniency, "we just received direct confirmation from the registered homeowner, Abigail Henderson. She states she is safe, sober, and that you are attempting to breach a secure room containing sensitive materials without authorization." Gavin's jaw dropped. "She is lying," he protested loudly. "She is highly medicated. You need to break down that door and check on her." "Sir," the officer interrupted, stepping closer to Gavin, forcing him to step back. The homeowner sounded entirely lucid. "She also informed dispatch that you are currently under investigation for financial fraud. Given that you are not the primary title holder of this residence, and you are actively attempting to destroy property with an unauthorized locksmith, I suggest you ask your hired help to pack up his tools and leave immediately. If we receive one more call from this address tonight regarding property damage, you will be leaving in the back of my cruiser." The locksmith did not need to be told twice. He quickly packed his heavy drill into a canvas bag, muttered an apology to the officers, and practically sprinted out the front door into the snowstorm. The officers lingered for a few more minutes, ensuring the locksmith had vacated the premises and warning Gavin one last time about property damage before returning to their patrol cars. The heavy front door clicked shut, leaving Gavin, Patricia, and the rest of his family standing in the freezing foyer, utterly defeated. I watched Gavin kick the console table in pure frustration. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. Less than 10 minutes later, a sleek black town car pulled into my snow-covered driveway. The driver's side door opened, and a young woman stepped out, shivering as she hurried toward the front porch. She had long blonde hair and was carrying a small medical bag. When Gavin opened the door, he immediately pulled her inside, wrapping his arms around her for a brief, frantic moment before turning to his mother. "Mom, this is Kendra," Gavin announced, his voice carrying down the hallway to where I was listening. "She is a registered nurse. I called her to come help manage Abigail's medication schedule and keep an eye on her condition." I zoomed in on the security camera feed, my eyes narrowing. Kendra was not wearing a standard nursing uniform. She was wearing a tight designer winter coat, and as she reached up to brush the snow from her hair, the hallway lights caught the unmistakable gleam of a rose gold Cartier watch on her left wrist. My breath hitched. That was not just any Cartier watch. It was a vintage Tank Française, a specific model with a custom-engraved clasp. It was the exact watch my late mother had left me, the one that had mysteriously disappeared from my jewelry box last month. Gavin had claimed it was likely misplaced by the cleaning service. Now it was sitting proudly on the wrist of his 23-year-old mistress, who he had just brought into my home under the guise of being a medical professional. The vintage Cartier watch on Kendra's wrist caught the dim light of the hallway. It was the exact timepiece my late mother had left me, the one Gavin claimed the cleaning service had lost. Now it was flaunted on the wrist of a 23-year-old mistress, playing the role of a registered nurse. I zoomed in on the security camera feed from my phone, my blood boiling, but my mind remaining absolutely clinical. I was not just going to kick them out. I was going to dismantle their entire reality piece by piece. Gavin knocked heavily on my guest suite door. "Gillian, open up," he demanded, his voice muffled through the solid oak. "I brought a private nurse to check your vitals and manage your pain medication. You cannot lock yourself in there forever. My mother is worried sick about your mental state." I decided to play along to gather more evidence. I pressed the button on my smart home app to unlock the door and rolled my wheelchair backward. Gavin pushed the door open immediately, stepping into the comforting warmth of my portable generator-powered room. He shivered, rubbing his arms while Kendra stepped in behind him. She was wearing a tight designer coat and a sickly sweet smile that did not reach her eyes. "Hi, Gillian," Kendra said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Gavin told me you have been struggling with your recovery. I am here to help get you back on track." Gavin quickly retreated to the freezing living room to warm up by the small fireplace, with his family, leaving Kendra alone with me. As soon as the door clicked shut, her sweet smile vanished. She took off her coat deliberately, adjusting her sleeve so the stolen Cartier watch was front and center. She looked around my luxurious guest suite with greedy, evaluating eyes, as if she were already measuring the space for her own furniture. "You have a really nice setup here," Kendra noted, running her hand along the edge of my mahogany dresser. "It is a shame you are stuck in that chair. Gavin told me you have always been high maintenance, but locking his family out in the cold is a bit extreme, do not you think?" I stared at her, my expression utterly blank. "Are you here to do a medical assessment, or are you just here to give interior design critiques while wearing stolen jewelry?" Kendra flinched slightly, her hand dropping from the dresser. She quickly opened her small medical bag and pulled out a plastic cup containing 2 large, unfamiliar white pills. "I do not know what you are talking about," Kendra said, stepping toward me. "Gavin asked me to administer your pain medication. You need to swallow these right now so you can finally go to sleep and stop causing problems for everyone. I looked at the pills. I knew exactly what my prescribed spinal fusion medication looked like, and those were not it. They looked like heavy sedatives likely intended to knock me out completely so Gavin could gain access to my devices or force my fingerprint onto documents. I am not taking unprescribed narcotics from a woman whose only qualification is sleeping with my husband, I replied coldly. Put them away and get out of my room. Kendra scoffed, dropping the fake professional act entirely. She slammed the plastic cup onto my nightstand. You know Gavin deserves a real woman who is not broken and bitter. You should just make this easy for everyone and step aside. You cannot even walk, let alone be a proper wife. She turned on her heel and strutted out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I immediately locked it again. Out in the living room, the temperature was still brutal. Through my security cameras, I watched Kendra huddle next to Gavin. She whispered something in his ear, playing the victim before loudly announcing to the shivering family that they all needed to warm up with a hot, extravagant meal. We should order a feast from that high-end steakhouse downtown, Kendra suggested, brightly wrapping her arms around Gavin. It will raise everyone's spirits. Gavin can put it on the house account. Patricia and Brittany eagerly agreed, desperate for a distraction from the freezing cold. Terrence shook his head in disapproval, but stayed quiet. Gavin pulled out his platinum credit card, which was a secondary card tied directly to my primary bank account. He called the restaurant and placed an enormous order for dry-aged Wagyu steaks, jumbo lobster tails, and expensive imported wine. The total came out to over $800. An hour later, the delivery driver arrived at the front door carrying multiple large insulated bags. Gavin stepped up to pay, swiping his platinum card through the driver's portable terminal. A sharp beep echoed in the foyer. The driver frowned, trying the card again. "I am sorry, sir," the driver said awkwardly. "The card has been declined." Gavin frowned, his face flushing with embarrassment in front of his hungry family. "That is impossible. Try it again." The terminal beeped a third time. Declined. Patricia stomped her foot in frustration. She marched straight down the hallway and began pounding furiously on my guest room door. "Gillian, open this door right now. You vindictive, stingy witch. Did you seriously cancel the credit card just to starve us? We have an $800 food delivery waiting and you are embarrassing my son." I unlocked the door and rolled my wheelchair out into the freezing hallway, bundled in my thick, heated blanket. The entire family, including Gavin and Kendra, was gathered behind Patricia, glaring at me with immense hatred. "I did not cancel the credit card," I said, my voice cutting through the icy air like a blade. I looked directly at Gavin. The bank automatically locked the account for suspicious fraudulent activity. "What fraud?" Gavin demanded, stepping forward to defend his bruised ego. "I have barely used that card this month." I pulled out a printed bank statement from the folder on my lap. The bank flagged a massive recurring charge. $30,000 completely drained over the last 6 months for a luxury high-rise apartment lease in the financial district. An apartment leased exclusively under the name Kendra Davis. Patricia gasped, turning to look at the young woman. Brittany's jaw dropped. Richard stepped back in shock. Terrence let out a heavy sigh, crossing his arms. Gavin began to sweat profusely despite the freezing temperature in the hallway. He stammered, his eyes darting frantically. "It is a startup office for my new tech company. I needed a professional space to meet investors. Kendra is just the property manager handling the lease. You are trying to sabotage my business." "A startup office," I repeated, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. "Then why did your property manager just bill this exact same credit card account for a prenatal ultrasound?" I pulled a crisp, white medical receipt from my folder and threw it directly onto the console table in the hallway. It fluttered down, displaying Kendra's full legal name alongside the indisputable billing code for a first-trimester pregnancy scan. "Is that what you call a luxury 2-bedroom apartment rented under your name for a 23-year-old girl who is currently carrying your illegitimate child?" I asked, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the house. Kendra instinctively covered her stomach, stepping away from Gavin. The truth was out, and the real explosion was about to begin. Gavin's jaw dropped in absolute horror. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in the dim light of the snowstorm reflecting through the large bay windows. He stared at the ultrasound receipt resting on the console table, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. The fake nurse he had brought into my home was not here to manage my medication. She was here to rub her pregnancy in my face under his protection. Kendra, who had been shivering in her designer winter coat just moments ago, suddenly took a step back. Her hands instinctively moved to cover her flat stomach, confirming what the receipt already declared. She looked at Gavin with wide, panicked eyes, silently demanding him to fix the disastrous situation he had dragged her into. The entire hallway was frozen in a tense, freezing silence, the only sound being the howling winter storm outside battering against the glass. I expected Patricia to scream. I fully expected Richard to step forward and condemn his son for cheating on his wife and squandering tens of thousands of dollars of our joint funds behind my back. I thought they would at least pretend to have some shred of human decency. But instead, the dark reality of this toxic family revealed itself in the most disgusting way possible. Patricia leaned forward and picked up the ultrasound receipt with her manicured fingers. She looked at the date, then at Kendra's stomach, and finally a slow, calculated smile spread across her face. She turned to me, her eyes filled with cold, unadulterated malice. "Well, what exactly did you expect him to do, Gillian?" Patricia asked, crossing her arms over her chest, completely ignoring the fact that her breath was visible in the freezing air. "You have been married to my son for 6 long years, and you have failed to give this family a single heir. You are barren. A man of Gavin's stature needs a legacy. He needs a bloodline. If you cannot fulfill your basic duties as a traditional wife, you have absolutely no right to be angry when he finds a young, healthy woman who actually can." The sheer audacity of her entitlement took my breath away. Richard nodded in firm agreement, adjusting his collar as he stepped next to his wife to present a united front. "My wife is completely right," Richard stated, his tone devoid of any empathy. "Gavin is simply securing the future of our family name. You have always been far too focused on your corporate mergers, your acquisitions, and your demanding career. You brought this upon yourself by neglecting your home and your husband. You should be thanking Kendra for stepping up where you failed. You should be grateful we are even allowing you to stay in the same room as the mother of my future grandchild." I sat in my wheelchair staring at the two of them in pure disbelief. They were standing in a multi-million-dollar mansion that I bought with my own hard-earned money, defending a man who had stolen from me, all because I was supposedly barren. A condition that was caused entirely by the extreme physical trauma their precious son had inflicted upon me 2 years ago when his negligence led to my miscarriage. "This is absolutely disgusting," a deep, booming voice echoed from the back of the hallway. Everyone turned around. Terrence stepped forward. His broad shoulders were tense, and his dark eyes burned with righteous, undeniable fury. He pointed a large finger directly at Gavin, stepping right into the middle of the freezing space. "Are you all out of your minds?" Terrence demanded, his voice shaking the frost-covered windows. Gavin stole money from his wife. He pushed her down a flight of stairs and ruined her spine. He brought his pregnant mistress into her home while she is recovering from major surgery, and you two are defending him. You are blaming Gillian for his infidelity. This is absolute trash behavior, and you all know it." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest dramatically. "How dare you speak to us like that? We are your family. You are not acting like family. You are acting like parasites." Terrence fired back, his voice echoing loudly. "I have watched Gillian bend over backward for you people since the day I met her. She paid off Gavin's student loans. She bought this house, and this is how you repay her, by protecting a cheater." Brittany, who had been quiet since I locked the master bedroom, suddenly lunged forward. She grabbed Terrence's arm, her acrylic nails digging sharply into his heavy winter jacket. "Shut your mouth, Terrence!" Brittany hissed, her face contorting with ugly rage. "This is family business. You are just an outsider who married into this circle. My brother is doing what he has to do to protect his future. Do not you dare disrespect my parents in front of me." "I am disrespecting them because they have zero morals," Brittany Terrence shouted back, ripping his arm away from her violent grasp. I am deeply ashamed to be associated with this family. Gillian has done nothing but provide for you people. She paid for your vacations, she hosted your holidays, and you treat her like dirt the moment she cannot serve you. What Gavin did is a vile betrayal, and what your parents are doing is enabling a monster. Without a single second of hesitation, Brittany raised her hand and delivered a resounding, vicious slap across Terrence's face. The smack echoed sharply through the freezing hallway. Terrence stood completely still, his cheek turning an angry shade of red. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles feathering beneath his dark skin. I said, "Shut up," Brittany growled, pointing a shaking finger directly in his face. "You make your living running a mediocre construction company, while my brother is a visionary entrepreneur. You do not get to judge him. You do not get to judge any of us. If you do not like how my family operates, you know exactly where the front door is." Terrence looked at his wife, a profound sadness and devastating realization washing over his features. The woman he loved had just showed her true colors, confirming she was just as rotten as the rest of her bloodline. He slowly backed away from her, shaking his head in disbelief. "I am done," Terrence muttered, turning away from the group. "I am going to the guest room to pack my bags. I am leaving this madhouse tonight. I am not spending another minute under the same roof as you people." As Terrence walked past my wheelchair, heading toward the dark hallway leading to the guest suites, I reached out and gently grabbed the sleeve of his heavy winter coat. He paused, looking down at me with exhausted, incredibly sympathetic eyes. "I am so sorry, Gillian," he whispered. "You do not deserve this." "Neither do you, Terrence," I whispered back, my voice so low that only he could hear it over the howling wind outside. Under the cover of my heated blanket, I slipped my hand into the side pocket of my wheelchair. I pulled out a small, heavily encrypted silver USB drive. With a swift, discreet movement, I slid the drive directly into the deep exterior pocket of Terrence's coat. He frowned, confused, about to ask a question, but I squeezed his arm firmly to silence him. "Plug that into your laptop when you get to a safe place," I whispered, my eyes locking intensely onto his. "It contains 6 months of highly detailed financial statements. Your beloved wife, Brittany, has not just been defending her brother's fraud. She has been actively embezzling massive amounts of funds from your construction company payroll accounts to finance a luxury apartment and a brand new sports car for her 20-year-old personal fitness trainer." Terrence's eyes widened in sheer horror. The breath left his lungs in a sharp gasp. He looked over his shoulder at Brittany, who was currently comforting Gavin's mistress, alongside Patricia, and then back at me. I gave him a single definitive nod of confirmation. The very first domino of the in-laws' destruction had just been pushed. And tomorrow morning, Brittany was going to lose absolutely everything she held dear. The freezing temperature inside my house meant absolutely no one got a wink of sleep that night. When the pale winter sun finally began to rise over the heavily snow-covered driveway, the tension in the mansion was already at a terrifying breaking point. I remained comfortably wrapped in my thick, heated blanket inside the ground floor guest suite, monitoring the high-definition security cameras on my tablet. The main living room was a scene of utter misery. Patricia was bundled in 3 layers of coats, shivering violently on the stiff designer sofa. Richard was pacing the hardwood floor, vigorously rubbing his hands together to generate any amount of body heat. Gavin and his pregnant mistress Kendra were huddled near the extinguished gas fireplace, looking completely miserable and exhausted. But the real explosion did not start with them. It started in the hallway outside the guest rooms. At exactly 7 in the morning, a loud, violent crash echoed through the entire house. The sound of shattering plastic and tearing metal made Patricia jump out of her seat with a sudden shriek of terror. I switched the camera feed to the hallway just in time to see Terrence storming out of his temporary room. He was carrying Brittany's expensive silver laptop in his massive hands. With a roar of pure, unadulterated fury, Terrence marched into the living room and slammed the computer directly into the marble wall. The screen shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the keyboard snapped in half, raining electronic debris all over the freezing floor. "Are you insane?" Brittany shrieked, running out of the room in her silk pajamas. Her face was pale with shock, her hands pulling frantically at her messy hair. "Terrence, what is wrong with you? That is my work computer." "Your work computer," Terrence yelled, his deep voice booming so loudly it rattled the frosted windows. "You mean the computer you use to embezzle funds from my construction company? The computer you use to wire thousands of dollars to a 20-year-old fitness trainer named Chad?" The entire living room froze. Gavin stopped rubbing his arms. Patricia gasped, her jaw dropping open. Richard stared at his daughter in absolute disbelief. Kendra shrank back against the wall, her eyes wide with fear. Brittany's face turned from pale white to a deep, guilty shade of crimson. She stammered frantically, waving her hands in the air. "Terrence, lower your voice. You do not know what you are talking about. Someone must have hacked my accounts. I would never steal from you. Do not you dare lie to me." Terrence stepped forward, his imposing frame towering over her. His chest heaved with heavy, angry breaths. "I stayed up all night verifying the files on that encrypted drive. You have been siphoning money out of our payroll account for 6 months. You use the money my crew bleeds for to pay for a luxury penthouse downtown and a brand new sports car for a college kid. You are a thief, Brittany. You are a thief and a cheater just like your pathetic brother." Patricia hurried across the room, her maternal instincts blindly kicking in to protect her daughter. "Now hold on a minute, Terrence. You are making wild accusations. Brittany is a loyal wife. There must be a logical explanation for these bank transfers. You cannot just destroy her property and yell at her in front of everyone." "There is no logical explanation," Patricia. Terrence fired back, completely unfazed by his mother-in-law's intervention. "She is a parasite. She has been draining my business to fund her disgusting double life, while I have been working 70-hour weeks to provide for her. I am done. I am absolutely done with her, and I am done with this toxic, lying family." Terrence turned his back on them and marched back into the guest room. He emerged a minute later, dragging his large leather suitcase behind him, his heavy winter coat already zipped up. "Terrence, please." Brittany cried out, panic finally setting in as she realized the gravity of the situation. She grabbed his arm, tears streaming down her face. "We can fix this. I can explain everything. I will get the money back. Do not leave me here." "Get your hands off me," Terrence growled, yanking his arm away with such force that Brittany stumbled backward and fell onto the cold marble floor. Patricia rushed to help her daughter up, glaring at Terrence. "You cannot just abandon your wife like this. You took vows. You are supposed to provide for her. If you walk out that door, you will regret it." "I will regret staying another second with a woman who stole from my employees to sleep with a child," Terrence stated coldly. He looked down at Brittany, who was now sobbing hysterically on the floor. "Enjoy the cold," Brittany. Terrence said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "I am driving straight to my lawyer's office. I am filing for divorce today. I have already contacted the bank and frozen every single joint account we share. Your credit cards will decline. Your access to my company funds is permanently revoked. You have absolutely nothing." "No, no, you cannot do that," Brittany screamed, scrambling to her feet. "You cannot leave me with nothing. How am I supposed to live?" "That is your problem now," Terrence replied. "And just so you know, I am also handing over the financial records to the police. Embezzlement is a serious crime. You better find yourself a good defense attorney because I am pressing full charges." Brittany let out a loud, agonizing wail, falling to her knees again. Patricia tried to comfort her, but the sheer reality of the situation had already set in. Brittany was completely broke, utterly exposed, and facing imminent criminal charges. Terrence did not look back. He grabbed his suitcase, walked straight past a stunned Gavin and a silent Richard, and headed for the front door. As he reached the entryway, he paused and looked toward the hallway where my guest suite was located. "Thank you, Gillian," Terrence said loudly, his voice echoing through the freezing house. "Thank you for opening my eyes." With that, he opened the heavy oak door, stepped out into the blinding snowstorm, and slammed the door shut behind him. The booming sound of the door closing felt like a judge's gavel slamming down, finalizing Brittany's absolute ruin. In the living room, total despair had taken over. Brittany was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her mother's coat. Patricia was crying alongside her, realizing that her daughter's comfortable life was officially over. Richard stood in silent shock while Gavin paced back and forth, muttering curses under his breath. Kendra, standing by the extinguished fireplace, pulled her coat tighter around her pregnant belly. She looked at Gavin with growing unease. The realization that this wealthy, powerful family was actually a house of cards was slowly dawning on her. Gavin caught her looking and snapped at her to sit down, his own stress levels peaking as he realized his main financial safety net was completely locked away. I sat in my wheelchair inside my warm room, a satisfied smile spreading across my face. I checked my tablet screen. The security cameras captured every angle of their misery. Brittany was screaming that her life was over. Patricia was trying to call Terrence, but her calls went straight to voicemail. The freezing temperatures inside the house were biting harder now, punishing them for their greed and entitlement. One parasite had been effectively neutralized and stripped of all her resources, but my work was far from over. Gavin and his parents were still clinging to the false hope that they could outsmart me and seize control of my assets. They were about to learn that taking me down was a fatal impossibility. The sudden departure of Terrence and the immediate freezing of Brittany's stolen funds sent a brutal shockwave through the freezing house. Without Terrence's steady income and premium credit cards to subsidize their extravagant lifestyle, the harsh reality of their situation crashed down on Gavin and his parents. Patricia and Richard huddled together on the living room sofa, wrapped in cheap blankets, watching their daughter sob hysterically on the floor. But Gavin did not spare a single ounce of sympathy for his sister. Instead, his eyes darted around the room with manic, desperate energy. His fraudulent tech startup was already a massive failure. His secret apartment lease had been exposed, and his pregnant mistress was standing right there demanding financial security. He needed cash, and he needed it immediately to salvage his pathetic ego and avoid federal prison. Through the high-definition security camera feed on my tablet, I watched Gavin pull Kendra aside into the dim hallway. He whispered frantically, his hands shaking as he explained that his backup plan involving Brittany's embezzled funds was now completely destroyed. Kendra looked terrified but compliant. She reached into her designer medical bag and handed him a small, unmarked amber prescription bottle. Gavin grabbed it, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unhinged desperation. He knew his time was running out and he was ready to cross the ultimate line. A few minutes later, the heavy oak door of my guest suite rattled violently. Gavin had used the emergency manual override key. He must have begged the security company for claiming a medical emergency. The door swung open and he immediately stepped into the warm, generator-powered room, pulling the door shut behind him to trap the heat inside. His hair was disheveled and his expensive cashmere sweater was wrinkled. He locked the door behind him, his eyes locking onto my wheelchair with a dark, predatory intensity. In his left hand, he held a glass of water and two massive, unfamiliar white pills. In his right hand, he gripped a printed legal document and an electronic ink pad. "It is time for your medication, Gillian," Gavin said, his voice dropping an octave, attempting to sound soothing, but completely failing to hide the underlying menace. "Kendra said your pain levels must be unbearable right now. She prescribed a heavy sedative to help you sleep through the recovery." I looked at the glass of water and the unmarked pills resting in his palm. I did not need a medical degree to know those were not painkillers. They were heavy military-grade tranquilizers designed to render a person completely unconscious and compliant. If I swallowed those pills, I would be incapacitated within 10 minutes, leaving me entirely at his mercy. "I do not need any medication, Gavin," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady and maintaining direct eye contact. "The pain is manageable. Put the pills away and get out of my room." Gavin stepped closer, his facade of a caring husband cracking instantly. He slammed the glass of water onto my nightstand, spilling some of it onto the polished wood. "You are taking these pills right now, Gillian," Gavin growled, leaning over my wheelchair, his face inches from mine. "You are going to swallow them, and then you are going to press your thumb onto this piece of paper." He shoved the legal document into my lap. I glanced down at the bold, capitalized letters at the top of the page. Medical and Financial Power of Attorney. If I signed this, or rather if he forced my incapacitated fingerprint onto the signature line, Gavin would gain immediate, unchecked legal control over my entire life. He could access my venture capital portfolios, drain my personal bank accounts, authorize any medical procedure he deemed necessary, and even commit me to a psychiatric facility against my will. He would strip me of everything I had worked my entire life to build. I looked up at him, my expression unreadable. You really think you can drug me and steal my assets right under my nose? I am your husband. Gavin shouted, his temper finally exploding. He grabbed the armrests of my wheelchair, trapping me in place. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to live in your shadow? Every single day I have to smile and play the supportive husband while everyone whispers that I am just a freeloader, married to a high-powered corporate executive. I am sick of living off the scraps you throw at me. I am sick of being introduced as the husband of the great M&A director. I am a visionary. I deserve the funding you hoard in your greedy little accounts. You emasculated me. You made me feel like a beggar in my own marriage, but not anymore. Today, I am taking everything. The money, the house, the investments. It is all going to be mine. Now open your mouth and swallow these pills. He aggressively pinched my jaw, his fingers digging painfully into my skin, trying to force my mouth open. Drink the water and swallow the pills, Gillian. I will not ask you again. I did not scream. I did not panic. I simply reached up, grabbed his wrist with a grip fueled by years of silent endurance, and violently twisted his hand away from my face. With a swift, precise motion, I snatched the pills from his open palm and threw them directly into his shocked face. The heavy white tablets bounced off his cheek and scattered across the hardwood floor. Are you insane? Gavin roared, stumbling backward in sheer disbelief, his hands flying up to his face. I calmly reached into my folder and pulled out a crisp white laboratory report. I tossed it onto the nightstand right next to the spilled water. Before you try to have me declared mentally incompetent and addicted to painkillers, you should probably check your facts, I said, my voice echoing with icy authority. That is a certified toxicology report from an independent private clinic processed at 8 o'clock this morning. My blood is completely clean. I have not ingested a single narcotic sedative or painkiller since I was discharged from the hospital. I have been enduring the pain of a spinal fusion with nothing but sheer willpower and over-the-counter anti-inflammatories. You cannot legally claim I am impaired or unstable. Gavin stared at the toxicology report, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. You cannot prove I tried to force you. It is your word against mine. I will tell the police you are having a paranoid delusion. I smiled, tapping the small blinking red light hidden inside the smoke detector directly above his head. You might want to rethink that strategy, Gavin, I said softly, because every single second of you threatening me, admitting your resentment, and attempting to forcefully drug me to secure a fraudulent power of attorney has just been recorded in high-definition audio and video. And the best part, the feed is not saved on a local hard drive. It is currently streaming live directly to the encrypted servers of my corporate lawyer, Mr. Davis. Gavin froze, his eyes slowly darting up to the ceiling. The realization of his fatal mistake washed over him, draining the remaining life from his eyes. If you take one more step toward me, I continued, my voice sharp as a razor, Mr. Davis will forward the footage directly to the district attorney. Attempting to drug and extort a vulnerable patient for financial gain is a felony carrying a mandatory prison sentence. Now back away from my wheelchair before I ruin what is left of your miserable life. Gavin stumbled backward, his hands trembling violently. He looked at the scattered pills on the floor, the medical power of attorney in my lap, and the blinking red light on the ceiling. He was completely trapped, checkmated in his own twisted game. Without saying another word, he turned around and fled the guest suite, slamming the door behind him in a desperate, cowardly retreat. I smoothly locked the door again via my phone app. Gavin had failed to steal my assets, but the desperation in the house was reaching a fever pitch. With Gavin's main plan destroyed, his pregnant mistress was about to take matters into her own hands, completely unaware of the absolute devastation waiting for her. The freezing temperature inside the mansion was becoming truly unbearable. Without the central heating actively pumping warm air through the vents, the sprawling Tudor-style home felt like a massive, unforgiving icebox. I sat comfortably in my wheelchair, securely wrapped in my thick heated blanket, watching the high-definition security cameras on my tablet. The main living room was a scene of utter humiliating defeat. Patricia and Richard were huddled tightly together on the stiff designer sofa, shivering violently under thin decorative throw blankets that offered absolutely no real warmth. Brittany was still crying on the frozen marble floor, her lavish lifestyle completely in ruins after Terrence walked out on her. Gavin paced back and forth in the dimly lit hallway, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. He was muttering curses under his breath as he fully realized his aggressive attempt to drug me and steal my financial assets had failed spectacularly. But it was Kendra who truly caught my attention on the security feed. The 23-year-old pregnant mistress was standing near the extinguished gas fireplace, her eyes darting nervously around the freezing room. She closely watched Gavin pace slowly, realizing that the wealthy, powerful entrepreneur she thought would secure her luxurious future was actually a broke, desperate, and pathetic fraud. His tech startup was a complete lie, his secret apartment lease was exposed and canceled, and his forceful attempt to gain control of my wealth had just been thwarted on camera. Kendra knew the ship was sinking rapidly, and she was absolutely not about to go down with it. I zoomed in on the camera feed, watching her every move. Kendra slowly backed away from the shivering family, pretending to head toward the main kitchen for a glass of water. But as soon as she was completely out of their line of sight, she slipped quietly down the dark, freezing hallway leading to the east wing of the house. My eyes narrowed. The East Wing housed my private corporate study, a highly restricted area that was strictly off-limits to everyone, especially Gavin. I quickly switched the camera view to the study. The room was pitch black, but the high-end infrared sensors provided a crystal-clear image on my tablet. Kendra crept into the room, pulling her tight designer winter coat securely around her pregnant belly. She pulled out her smartphone, using the bright flashlight to scan the room for valuables. Her eyes immediately landed on my solid mahogany desk. She moved quickly, her hands visibly shaking as she began pulling at the heavy wooden drawers. The first two drawers were locked tight, but the third one, the exact one I had intentionally left unlocked, slid open smoothly. Inside the drawer sat a sleek black velvet jewelry box. It contained my late grandmother's custom-cut diamond tennis bracelet and a pair of pristine, flawless South Sea pearl earrings pieces easily worth well over $50,000. Kendra gasped, a greedy, triumphant smile spreading across her youthful face. She eagerly picked up the velvet box, popped it open, and stared longingly at the glittering diamonds reflecting in her flashlight beam. Without a single second of hesitation or moral conflict, she snapped the box shut and shoved it deep into the oversized exterior pocket of her winter coat. She turned on her heel, entirely ready to sprint out of the freezing house and disappear into the snowy night with her stolen fortune. I tapped the screen of my tablet. A loud, definitive mechanical click echoed through the study as the electronic deadbolt on the heavy oak door engaged, securely sealing the room from the outside. Simultaneously, the smart home security system activated the ultimate protective measures for the restricted area. With a harsh, grinding metallic clatter, heavy steel security shutters rolled down over the large bay windows, plunging the room into absolute, inescapable darkness. Kendra jumped, letting out a sharp, terrified yelp. She frantically scrambled across the floor, rushing toward the solid oak door. She grabbed the brass handle and yanked it with all her might. It did not budge a single inch. The electronic deadbolt had fully engaged, permanently trapping her inside the heavily fortified room, like a desperate rat in a very expensive cage. "Gavin!" Kendra screamed, pounding her fists aggressively against the thick wood. Gavin opened the door. "The system trapped me in here. Help me get out." In the living room, Gavin heard the faint, muffled screams coming from upstairs. He sprinted toward the staircase, his face pale with sudden panic. "Kendra, what are you doing up there?" Gavin yelled, rushing up the carpeted steps two at a time. He reached the locked study door and pulled aggressively at the handle. It was completely unyielding. Through the solid wood, he could hear Kendra sobbing hysterically. I just went in to look around. The door locked behind me and the metal blinds came down. Kendra cried out, her voice cracking with pure fear. Get me out of here, Gavin. I am freezing and I am scared. I cannot open it. The whole house is locked down. Gavin shouted back, hitting the heavy door with his shoulder in a futile, pathetic attempt to break it open. He turned around, pacing the hallway in sheer frustration. This is Gillian's doing. She intentionally trapped you inside. Before Gavin could even attempt to find a heavy object to break the door down, the deafening blaring sound of police sirens pierced the freezing night air. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the snow-covered driveway, signaling the rapid arrival of law enforcement for the second time that evening. My high-end security system was directly linked to a private corporate monitoring company. Any unauthorized access to the restricted study, combined with the physical removal of tagged high-value assets, automatically triggered a silent alarm, instantly dispatching the police for a confirmed felony burglary in progress. Gavin froze, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated panic. He rushed down the stairs, nearly tumbling over his own feet, just as two heavily armed police officers began pounding heavily on the front door. Police department, open the door immediately. The authoritative voice echoed intensely through the foyer. Gavin unlocked the front door, stepping back nervously as the officers entered, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Officer, there is a massive misunderstanding. My girlfriend is accidentally trapped in an upstairs room because the smart lock malfunctioned. The lead officer, a tall, serious man with snow on his uniform, stepped past Gavin without a second glance. We received a verified silent alarm from the security monitoring company indicating a felony burglary in progress in the restricted second-floor study. The property owner, Gillian Henderson, confirmed the breach remotely. Where is the suspect? She is not a suspect. She is my pregnant girlfriend. Gavin protested loudly, his voice trembling with fear. She just wandered into the wrong room. You cannot arrest her. Lead the way, sir, the officer commanded, his tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. Gavin reluctantly led the officers up the stairs to the locked study. As they approached the door, I used my phone application to remotely disengage the electronic deadbolt. The heavy oak door clicked softly, swinging open slightly. The officers stepped inside, their bright flashlights sweeping across the dark room. Kendra was huddled tightly in the corner, clutching her designer coat firmly around her shivering body. She looked up, her eyes wide with sheer terror as the officers approached. Ma'am, please step away from the desk and keep your hands where we can see them, the lead officer instructed, shining his light directly onto her tear-stained face. I did not do anything, I swear, Kendra sobbed, stepping forward cautiously. I just got locked inside. As she moved, the heavy, oversized pocket of her coat caught on the sharp edge of the mahogany desk. The fabric tore slightly, and the black velvet box slipped out, crashing onto the hardwood floor right at the officer's heavy boots. The box popped open on impact, displaying the brilliant custom-cut diamond bracelet and the flawless pearl earrings. The officer looked down at the stolen jewelry, then back up at Kendra, his expression instantly hardening into stone. Is this yours, ma'am? The officer asked, his voice dangerously calm. Kendra froze, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. She stammered, unable to form a single coherent sentence. It was just sitting there. I was just looking at it. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, the second officer ordered, stepping forward and pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his utility belt. You are under arrest for grand larceny and felony burglary. No, you cannot arrest me. I am pregnant, Kendra shrieked, struggling as the officer firmly turned her around and snapped the cold steel cuffs onto her wrists. Gavin, do something. Do not let them take me. Gavin stood in the hallway, completely paralyzed. He watched in absolute horror as the officers escorted his sobbing, handcuffed mistress down the stairs and out the front door, right past his stunned parents. Patricia gasped, covering her mouth with her hands as Kendra was led away in sheer disgrace. Richard shook his head in disgust, realizing the severe gravity of the crimes taking place under the roof they were currently trespassing under. I sat in my warm guest suite, staring at the security feed with immense satisfaction. Kendra was officially facing felony charges for attempting to steal over $50,000 worth of custom jewelry. Gavin's carefully constructed world was completely collapsing, and the police now had direct, undeniable evidence of a felony committed by his mistress in my home. But the true devastation was just beginning because Kendra was not the type of woman to go down alone. Sitting in the quiet comfort of my heated guest suite, I opened my laptop and initiated a secure video conference call with Attorney Davis. He had driven to the local police precinct to formally represent my interests as the victim of grand larceny. The high-definition camera on his end flickered to life, showing him sitting in a quiet consultation room just down the hall from the main interrogation area. Gillian, Attorney Davis said, adjusting his glasses. The situation here is developing rapidly. Your husband's mistress is currently in the interrogation room, and she is completely crumbling under the pressure. Because my home security system captured the felony burglary in high definition, and because the stolen assets exceeded $50,000, the police are moving swiftly. Through the secure channel, Attorney Davis and I were permitted to listen to the initial processing interview, a standard procedure when high-net-worth corporate assets were involved. Kendra sat in the stark, brightly lit interrogation room, shivering uncontrollably, despite the heavy gray blanket a sympathetic officer had draped over her shoulders. The designer winter coat had been confiscated as evidence as the stolen velvet box had been found inside its torn pocket. She looked entirely different from the smug, arrogant woman who had strutted into my room holding heavy sedatives just an hour ago. The harsh reality of a grand larceny charge, compounded by a felony burglary, had completely broken her facade. Her makeup was entirely smeared from crying, and she was shaking under the harsh fluorescent lights. Two detectives sat across from her, a mountain of evidence resting on the metal table between them. You are facing grand larceny, felony burglary, and possession of stolen property, the lead detective stated, his voice flat and unforgiving. You broke into a secured room and attempted to flee with over $50,000 in custom jewelry. The homeowner caught you on high-definition infrared cameras. You are looking at a minimum of 10 to 15 years in a state penitentiary. Kendra let out a loud, agonizing sob, burying her face in her handcuffed hands. I cannot go to prison, she wailed, her voice cracking with pure terror. I am pregnant. My baby will be born in jail. Please, you have to help me. I did not want to do this. I was forced to do it. The second detective leaned forward, folding his arms across his chest. Forced by whom? By Gavin. Gavin Henderson. Kendra screamed, lifting her head rapidly. Her eyes were wide with sheer, desperate self-preservation. He is the one who told me where the jewelry was. He told me the desk drawer was unlocked. He said his wife was distracted and that I needed to grab the diamonds so we could pawn them for quick cash. He promised me he would disable the alarms. He lied to me. He is the mastermind behind all of this. I smiled, taking a sip of the warm tea I had placed on my nightstand. Attorney Davis unmuted his microphone for a brief second. There is no loyalty among thieves, Gillian, he observed dryly before muting himself again. Kendra was talking so fast she could barely breathe. She spilled every single dirty detail of Gavin's pathetic operation. She confessed that his tech startup was entirely fraudulent, that the money he stole from our joint savings was used to pay off his massive underground gambling debts, and that the luxury apartment was just a place to hide her from me. But then, desperate to secure full immunity, Kendra dropped a piece of information that made my blood run instantly cold. He is completely broke, but he told me we were about to be rich again. Kendra sobbed, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. He said he finally figured out a way to steal the equity from her mansion. The lead detective raised an eyebrow. Steal the equity? How exactly did he plan to do that? Kendra sniffled, wiping her nose with her shoulder since her hands were cuffed. He forged her signature on a bank application last month. He took out a HELOC, a home equity line of credit against that massive house. He told me he applied for $500,000, and he used his friend at the bank to push the approval through without calling his wife for verbal verification. He said the funds were going to be dispersed into a hidden account tonight. That is why he was so desperate for me to steal the jewelry. He needed cash to pay off a bookie, before the bank transfer cleared at midnight. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. A $500,000 HELOC. Gavin had forged my signature to take out a $500,000 loan against my $3 million property. The sheer audacity of his financial crime was staggering. He had escalated from petty theft and infidelity to federal bank fraud. The detective stopped writing. He looked up, his expression hardening into absolute stone. "Ma'am, are you confessing that you have direct knowledge of federal wire fraud and bank fraud committed by Gavin Henderson?" "Yes," Kendra sobbed, nodding vigorously. "Yes, I will testify to whatever you need. I will give you the dates, the bank names, everything. Just please do not send me to prison. I just wanted a nice life for my baby. He lied to me. He said he was a millionaire." The audio feed cut out, leaving me and Attorney Davis in complete silence. Gillian, Attorney Davis, said, his voice tight with professional alarm. "A home equity line of credit. If Gavin forged your signature and secured a $500,000 against your primary residence, he has committed a massive federal crime. But more importantly, if those funds clear into his account tomorrow, you could be held liable for the debt. We need to contact the bank immediately and freeze the disbursement." I sat back in my wheelchair, pulling the heated blanket tighter around my shoulders. A genuine, chilling laugh escaped my lips. Let the funds clear. Let him take the money. By forging my signature on a property I do not directly own, Gavin did not just commit standard bank fraud. He committed high-level corporate wire fraud against a federal institution. The winter night slowly faded into a freezing gray morning. The snowstorm had finally stopped, leaving the Tudor mansion buried under 2 feet of snow. Inside, the temperature was hovering just above freezing. Patricia and Richard were shivering uncontrollably on the sofa, their lips tinted blue. Gavin had been pacing the entire night, waiting for a call from the police station that never came. At exactly 9 in the morning, Gavin's phone chimed with a loud notification. He pulled it from his pocket, his exhausted, panicked face suddenly lighting up with pure, unadulterated triumph. He let out a loud, maniacal laugh that startled his shivering parents. "It cleared," Gavin shouted, punching the air. The wire transfer cleared. "I have $500,000 in liquid cash." He stomped down the hallway, marching directly toward my guest suite. He pounded his fists aggressively against the heavy oak door. "Gillian, open this door right now!" Gavin yelled, his voice echoing with arrogant confidence. I picked up my tablet, unlocked the electronic deadbolt, and rolled my wheelchair out into the freezing hallway. Gavin stood there holding his phone up to my face, showing me the massive account balance glowing on the screen. "Look at this," Gavin sneered, a wicked, victorious smile spreading across his face. $500,000. I took out a home equity line of credit against this massive house, and I forged your precious signature to do it. He reached into his pocket and threw a crumpled piece of paper onto my lap. It was a printed confirmation page from the bank. "This house is now carrying my debt." Gavin gloated, his chest puffed out. "Be smart and sign the deed over to my parents, or else you will shoulder half of this massive debt in the divorce." I did not scream. I did not panic. I did not even flinch. Instead, a slow, genuine laugh bubbled up from deep within my chest. It started as a soft chuckle and quickly escalated into a full, resonant laugh that echoed sharply down the freezing, empty hallway. Gavin's smug smile faltered instantly. His chest deflated slightly as he took a cautious step back. "What is so funny?" he demanded, his voice losing its confident, arrogant edge. "You are looking at $250,000 in marital debt, Gillian. You are trapped. This is not a joke." Hearing the commotion, Patricia and Richard shuffled out of the freezing living room. They were wrapped tightly in cheap, scratchy blankets, their faces pale from the plummeting indoor temperatures. "Did you get the money?" son Patricia asked, her teeth chattering but her eyes gleaming with renewed greed. "Did the bank really transfer $500,000? "They did, Mom." Gavin boasted, attempting to regain his swagger as he wrapped an arm around his mother's shivering shoulders. "The funds are sitting safely in my private account. Gillian thought she could lock us out and freeze us out of her precious assets, but I just outsmarted her. I took out a massive loan against this very house, and because we are legally married, she is fully responsible for half the debt. Richard chuckled, rubbing his freezing hands together. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Now she has no choice but to sign the property over to us to settle the debt. We will have a new mansion and she will be out on the street with nothing but her wheelchair. Oh, Gavin. I sighed, wiping a small tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye. You really should have paid much closer attention when I told you I calculate corporate risks and manage high-level mergers for a living. Do you honestly believe I would leave a $3 million real estate asset completely unprotected while living with a man who steals from my savings to fund a fake startup and a pregnant mistress? I smoothly reached into the hidden compartment of my wheelchair, a secure space specifically designed to hold sensitive legal documents. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope adorned with the official embossed gold seal of the state government. I tossed it effortlessly onto the floor right at Gavin's expensive mud-stained boots. Go ahead, I said, gesturing toward the folder with a calm, steady hand. Open it. Read the very first page out loud for yourself and your proud parents. Gavin stared at the folder, his hands suddenly beginning to tremble. The temperature in the hallway was brutal, but the sweat beading on his forehead was entirely born of mounting terror. The harsh winter light filtering through the frosted windows cast long, eerie shadows across the marble floor, illuminating the exact moment his delusion began to crack. He slowly bent down, picked up the thick envelope, and pulled out the crisp legal documents inside. His eyes darted across the text, scanning the dense, complicated legal jargon. As he read, the remaining color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. Read it, Gavin! I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerously icy tone that required absolute obedience. This, Gavin stammered, his breath catching painfully in his throat. This says the property ownership was transferred to an entity called the Apex Horizon Blind Trust. Exactly. I smiled, leaning forward in my wheelchair, ensuring he saw the absolute lack of mercy in my eyes. I transferred the complete legal title of this mansion into a highly secure, irrevocable blind trust exactly 1 year ago, right around the time I first started noticing your highly suspicious financial withdrawals. I am not the legal owner of this house anymore, Gavin. The trust is. And the trust is managed exclusively by a board of independent federal trustees located in Delaware. Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as if the oxygen had just been sucked out of the freezing hallway. What does that mean? What is a blind trust? It means, I said, locking eyes with my mother-in-law, that when your brilliant son forged my signature on that bank application last month, he did not just commit standard marital financial fraud. He committed fraud against a legally protected, federally regulated entity. Gavin dropped the documents onto the hardwood floor, stumbling backward until his back hit the freezing wall with a loud thud. No, the bank approved the loan. The underwriter signed off on it. They verified the deed. They verified a fraudulent document you submitted utilizing a fake notary stamp. I corrected him sharply, systematically dismantling his entire reality. Because the property is held in a blind trust, taking out a home equity line of credit requires the explicit notarized signatures of 3 independent federal trustees. By forging my name, a person who holds absolutely zero legal authority over the asset, and submitting those documents electronically across state lines, you did not just secure a loan. You committed federal wire fraud, severe bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. You set me up, Gavin whispered, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated terror. You knew I applied for the loan. You let the disbursement clear on purpose. I did. I confirmed, my tone utterly devoid of any sympathy. If I had stopped the application, you would have just gotten a slap on the wrist for attempted fraud. But by letting the $500,000 clear into your private account this morning, the crime is fully completed. The federal offense is locked in stone. You crossed the point of no return. I picked up my smartphone, tapping the screen to bring up a live view of the financial tracking software Attorney Davis had installed for me. And here is the absolute best part, Gavin. I continued turning the bright screen so he could clearly see the rapidly updating data. The bank's automated fraud detection system, which my lawyer tipped off yesterday evening, flagged the mismatch between the deed holder and your forged signature the exact second the funds were disbursed. The money you think you have to pay off your bookie. It is already frozen by the federal authorities. You cannot access a single penny of it. No! Gavin shrieked frantically, pulling out his own phone and opening his banking application with shaking fingers. The screen that had shown a massive life-saving balance just moments ago now displayed a glaring red error message that read, "Account frozen. Contact federal authorities immediately." "The loan you took out is entirely your personal debt," I stated, my voice echoing through the frozen hallway. "I am not legally liable for a single cent because my signature was verifiably forged against a trust asset. You owe the bank $500,000, Gavin. And because you obtained those funds through federal wire fraud, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is already building a comprehensive criminal case against you as we speak." Richard staggered backward, clutching his wife's arm for support. "You ruined my son," he stammered, his voice weak and trembling. "You deliberately let him destroy his life. He destroyed his own life the moment he decided to betray me, steal from me, and physically assault me." I fired back, glaring at the pathetic man who raised a monster. I simply handed him the shovel he used to dig his own grave. Gavin fell to his knees on the freezing hardwood floor, dropping his phone. His grand, arrogant plan to steal my wealth, pay off his massive gambling debts, and fund his pregnant mistress's luxurious lifestyle had completely evaporated into thin air. The realization that he had just voluntarily signed his own federal conviction washed over him, stripping away every ounce of his manufactured bravado. He was entirely broke, heavily in debt, and staring down the barrel of a federal indictment that carried a mandatory minimum prison sentence. "Please." Gavin sobbed, his hands gripping the wheels of my chair in an act of pure, pathetic desperation. "Gillian, please. You have to call your lawyer. You have to tell the bank it was a misunderstanding. If the feds get involved, I will go to prison for 10 years. You cannot do this to me. I am your husband. You lost the right to call yourself my husband the day you shoved me down those stairs and killed our unborn child." I whispered, my voice dripping with absolute unforgiving hatred. Gavin froze, his eyes widening in pure horror. He knew I had finally spoken the undeniable truth aloud, stripping away the lies he had fed his family and himself. I hit the button on my wheelchair smoothly, backing away from his desperate, grasping hands. "Attorney Davis has already submitted the complete file to the federal prosecutor," I said, looking down at the broken man shivering on the floor. "The trap has snapped shut, Gavin. There is absolutely no way out." Silence filled the frozen hallway, a heavy, suffocating silence. A cold, absolute silence. He stared at me with wide, bloodshot eyes, the reality of federal prison finally crushing the last remnants of his bloated ego. "Mom," Gavin whimpered, turning his head slowly toward Patricia. "Mom, you have to help me. Call a lawyer. Use Dad's retirement fund. We can fight this. We can hire a defense team." Patricia stepped back. She took one step back and then another. The fierce maternal instinct she had so proudly weaponized against me just a day ago completely evaporated in the face of a federal indictment. She looked at her son not with love, but with the terrified calculation of a cornered animal, realizing it was standing next to a predator's fresh bait. "Do not look at me," Patricia hissed, her voice trembling not from the freezing temperature of the house, but from sheer unadulterated terror. "We have absolutely nothing to do with this. You forged a federal document. You stole $500,000 from a bank. Richard, go to the guest room and get our bags. We are leaving this house right now." "Mom, please," Gavin screamed, his voice cracking violently. He crawled toward her on his hands and knees. He was begging. He was completely, utterly begging. The visionary tech entrepreneur, the master manipulator, the arrogant man who pushed me down a flight of stairs and mocked my paralysis to his entire family. He was reduced to a pathetic crawling child on my freezing hardwood floor. I watched him break. I watched the man who had stolen my money shatter. I watched the abusive husband who had ruined my spine collapse. I watched him lose every single thing he thought made him powerful, stripped down to nothing but fear and humiliation. "Get away from me," Patricia shouted, kicking her expensive boot out to keep Gavin away from her legs. "If the federal investigators think we are involved in this wire fraud, they will seize our retirement accounts. They will take our house in Chicago. Richard, hurry up. Richard scrambled down the hallway, completely abandoning his son without a second glance. The vaunted family loyalty that Brittany had screamed about yesterday was nothing but a fragile illusion completely shattered the moment real consequences arrived. They were parasites, and parasites always abandon a dying host. Gavin collapsed onto his stomach, his forehead resting against the icy marble. He let out a raw, guttural sob that echoed miserably through the massive house. His pregnant mistress was in jail. His sister was facing embezzlement charges and a divorce. His parents were fleeing. His bank accounts were frozen. I pressed the joystick on my wheelchair and rolled slightly forward, looking down at the top of his head. "You wanted my money so badly, Gavin," I said, my voice echoing with a calm surgical precision. "You wanted the status. You wanted the luxury. You thought you could simply take it by force because you believed I was weak. But the only thing you successfully secured today is a 10 to 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary." Suddenly, the blinding flash of red and blue lights illuminated the frosted windows of the front foyer again. But these were not the standard lights of local police cruisers. 3 black unmarked SUVs tore up the snowy driveway, boxing in Richard's rental car. The heavy, authoritative pounding on the front door was deafening. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," a booming voice shouted from the porch. "Open the door immediately. We have an active warrant for the arrest of Gavin Henderson." Gavin jerked his head up, his eyes wide with sheer panic. He scrambled to his feet, slipping frantically on the polished hardwood, looking desperately for a back exit. But the smart home security system was still fully engaged. The steel security shutters were down. Every single exterior door was magnetically locked and secured. He was completely trapped in the icebox he had tried to claim as his own. I tapped the screen of my tablet. The front door unlocked with a loud electronic chime and swung open. 4 federal agents in heavy tactical winter gear stormed into the foyer. Their eyes immediately locked onto Gavin, who was frozen in the middle of the hallway, shivering violently and covered in his own nervous sweat. Gavin Henderson, the lead agent, announced, stepping forward with handcuffs already drawn. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Gavin did not fight them. He had absolutely no fight left in him. He turned around numbly, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. The heavy steel cuffs clicked securely around his wrists, the sound ringing out like the final bell of a championship fight. As the agents patted him down and read him his Miranda rights, Richard and Patricia scurried out of the guest hallway, dragging their heavy suitcases behind them. They stopped dead in their tracks, staring in horror at their golden child being hauled away in federal restraints. "Officers, please," Patricia stammered, raising her hands defensively. "We have nothing to do with this. We are just visiting. We did not know anything about his financial crimes." The lead agent barely glanced at her. "Save it for the deposition, ma'am. If you benefited from his fraudulent funds, you will be hearing from our forensic accounting department very soon." Patricia's face drained of all remaining color. Richard looked like he was about to pass out. An agent grabbed Gavin by the bicep, guiding him forcefully toward the front door. As he walked past my wheelchair, Gavin stopped for a brief second. He looked down at me, tears streaming freely down his pale cheeks. "Gillian," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling winter wind outside. "I am sorry." I looked right through him, my expression completely blank. "I do not accept your apology, Gavin. Enjoy prison." The agents pulled him out into the freezing snowstorm, shoving him into the back of a black SUV. I watched through the open doorway as the vehicle backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the road, taking the darkest chapter of my life away with it forever. I turned my wheelchair around to face Patricia and Richard. They were standing in the foyer, shivering, holding their luggage, looking around the freezing mansion with lost, terrified eyes. "Well," I said, a sharp, unyielding smile returning to my face. "The homeowner has just been hauled off to federal prison, and since this property is legally owned by a blind trust that does not authorize guests, you are officially trespassing." "Gillian, be reasonable," Richard pleaded, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. "There is a massive snowstorm outside. All the flights to Chicago are canceled until tomorrow. The hotels are completely booked. We have nowhere to go. That sounds like a terrible personal problem, I replied smoothly. You wanted to treat me like a maid in my own home. You wanted to throw me into the basement. You defended the man who broke my spine. Now get out of my house before I have you both arrested for criminal trespassing. I pressed a button on my smart home app. The heavy oak front door swung wide open, letting a blast of freezing, biting wind and snow directly into the foyer. Get out! I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute, undeniable authority. Patricia let out a loud, miserable sob. Richard grabbed her arm, and together they dragged their heavy suitcases out into the blinding, freezing snow. They had walked in yesterday acting like royalty, demanding respect and luxury. They were walking out today as broken, freezing beggars with absolutely nothing to their name. I tapped my tablet one last time. The heavy front door slammed shut behind them. The electronic deadbolts engaged with a satisfying permanent click. I adjusted the thermostat on my screen. Within seconds, the gentle hum of the central heating system roared to life, pushing glorious, comforting warmth through the vents of the sprawling mansion. The icebox was thawing. The parasites were gone. I leaned back in my wheelchair, closed my eyes, and took a deep, warm breath in my perfectly quiet, perfectly safe home. I leaned back in my wheelchair, closed my eyes, and took a deep, warm breath in my perfectly quiet, perfectly safe home. The morning sun poured through the massive bay windows, casting a golden glow across the polished hardwood floors. The storm outside had finally broken, leaving behind a pristine layer of white snow that buried the chaos of yesterday. I sat there in the absolute silence, sipping a cup of hot Earl Grey tea, savoring the profound peace that only comes when a toxic burden is permanently severed from your life. My phone vibrated softly on the glass coffee table, breaking the quiet. It was a secure email from Attorney Davis, accompanied by an automated alert from the banking application I had been monitoring. The federal freeze on Gavin's accounts was no longer just pending. It was absolute, final, and completely impenetrable. Through the detailed financial tracking software my legal team had engaged, I watched the digital dominoes fall in real time. Patricia and Richard, despite being thrown out into the freezing snow the night before, with their golden child sitting in a federal holding cell, were still clinging desperately to their delusions of grandeur. They truly believed Gavin's massive wire fraud had worked. They believed the $500,000 was sitting safely in his account, ready to bail him out and secure their lavish future. At exactly 9 in the morning, Patricia and Richard marched into a premier luxury real estate office downtown, their suitcases waiting in the lobby. They sat across from a high-end broker demanding to place a massive cash deposit on a sprawling suburban mansion they had toured online. Patricia, arrogant and completely detached from reality, aggressively slid Gavin's secondary platinum credit card across the polished desk. She demanded the broker process a $50,000 down payment immediately. The broker swiped the card. The machine flashed a bright red error code. Declined. Patricia scoffed, blaming the machine, and demanded he swipe it again. Declined. She ordered the broker to call the bank authorization line manually, completely confident in her son's stolen wealth. The broker placed the phone on speaker. A monotone banking representative announced that the account, along with all associated secondary cards, checking accounts, and emergency funds, had been permanently frozen by federal authorities due to an active investigation for massive wire fraud. The account balance was zero. Patricia and Richard were unceremoniously escorted out of the real estate office by building security. They had nothing. Nothing in their bank accounts. Nothing in their wallets. Nothing left of their arrogant, suffocating pride. They were stranded in the middle of the city, dragging heavy suitcases through the slush, realizing their son was not a visionary entrepreneur, but a penniless, exposed criminal. Meanwhile, Gavin had managed to secure a temporary release from holding. He had begged a former college roommate to front a small cash bond, promising to pay him back tenfold the moment he accessed his accounts. The moment Gavin stepped out of the precinct, he checked his banking app. The reality of his complete financial annihilation hit him like a freight train. The $500,000 he had stolen was gone, seized by the government. His personal savings were locked. His credit lines were canceled. He was entirely, undeniably bankrupt. A cornered rat is always the most dangerous, and Gavin was completely out of options. His ego simply would not allow him to accept that a woman in a wheelchair had systematically dismantled his entire existence. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the heavy iron gate at the end of my driveway rattled violently. I watched the security feed on my tablet as Gavin climbed over the wrought iron, his expensive cashmere coat tearing on the sharp metal spikes. He looked feral. His hair was matted with sweat. His eyes were wide bloodshot and devoid of any remaining sanity. He stomped up the snowy driveway, slipping on the ice, screaming my name at the top of his lungs. I did not lock the front door. I unlocked it. I wanted him to walk right into the final consequence of his actions. I sat in my wheelchair in the center of the grand foyer, perfectly composed, waiting for the storm to enter. Gavin burst through the double doors, bringing a gust of freezing wind with him. "You froze it!" he screamed, his voice cracking into a frantic, high-pitched squeal. "The bank took everything. The accounts are locked. My parents are sitting in a bus station and I cannot even afford a cup of coffee. Fix it right now." "That is how federal fraud investigations work, Gavin," I replied smoothly, resting my hands on the arms of my chair. "When you forge signatures and steal money from a blind trust, the government tends to take it back." "Fix it!" he roared, pacing the foyer like a rabid animal. He grabbed a priceless antique vase from the console table and hurled it violently at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, scattering ceramic shards across the marble. "Call your lawyer. Tell the bank it was a joint investment. Tell them I had your verbal authorization. If you do not make that call right now, they are going to lock me in a federal prison for a decade." 10 to 15 years is the standard sentencing guideline, I corrected him, my voice dripping with icy detachment. "But considering the undeniable video evidence of you attempting to drug me and extort my signature, I expect the prosecutor will aim for the absolute maximum." "You made your choices, Gavin. You chose the fake startup. You chose the pregnant mistress. You chose the theft. Now you get to live with the absolute ruin you created." He stared at me. He stared at the woman he had broken. He stared at the woman he had pushed down the stairs. He stared at the woman he truly believed would always remain silent and submissive. The reality of his absolute defeat finally shattered his mind completely. "If I am going down, you are dying with me," Gavin shrieked. He lunged forward, his hands outstretched like claws, aiming directly for my throat. His fingers were rigid, his face twisted into a mask of pure homicidal rage. He crossed the foyer in 2 massive strides, a desperate, frantic monster making his final strike to end my life. I did not flinch. I did not move my wheelchair. I did not even blink. Before Gavin's hands could brush the fabric of my sweater, a massive shadow detached itself from the dark alcove next to the sweeping staircase. Marcus, the elite private security contractor I had hired the moment I returned from the hospital, stepped directly into Gavin's path. With lightning speed and brutal efficiency, Marcus grabbed Gavin by the throat and the belt. He lifted the frantic man entirely off the polished marble floor and slammed him face first into the hardwood with a sickening bone-crunching thud. Gavin's breath left his lungs in a sharp, pathetic gasp as Marcus planted a heavy combat boot squarely between his shoulder blades, pinning him helplessly to the ground. The heavy silence of the grand foyer was broken only by the pathetic, ragged sound of Gavin struggling to pull oxygen into his lungs. Marcus did not flinch, his combat boot remaining firmly planted between my treacherous husband's shoulder blades. Within minutes, the distant wail of police sirens pierced the crisp afternoon air. I had triggered the silent panic button on my wheelchair the exact second Gavin broke through the front door. Local law enforcement swarmed the driveway, bursting through the entryway with their hands resting cautiously on their holsters. They took one look at the shattered antique vase, my calm demeanor, and the deranged man pinned to the floor before moving in to make the official arrest. Gavin was hauled to his feet, his hands forcefully yanked behind his back and secured with heavy steel handcuffs. He did not scream this time. The absolute, undeniable reality of his situation had finally broken his mind. He stared blankly at the floor as the officers marched him out of the mansion, placing him into the back of a squad car for the second time in 24 hours. This time he was facing felony assault and attempted murder charges on top of his federal wire fraud indictment. Just as the police cruiser began to back down the long, snow-covered driveway, a battered yellow taxi pulled up to the wrought iron gates. The doors opened and Patricia and Richard stumbled out. They looked absolutely horrific. Their expensive winter coats were stained with city slush, their faces windburned and exhausted. Without Gavin's stolen funds to pay for a hotel, and with all their joint accounts permanently frozen by the federal government, they had nowhere else to go. They dragged their heavy suitcases up the driveway, arguing frantically with the taxi driver who was demanding his fare. Richard simply waved the man off, marching directly toward the front steps, where I sat comfortably in my wheelchair, flanked by Marcus and 2 remaining police officers. "Officer, thank goodness you are here," Richard announced, attempting to summon his old authoritative business voice, though it cracked pathetically. "My daughter-in-law illegally locked us out of our residence last night. We have established tenant rights by staying here, and we demand immediate re-entry. We have nowhere else to go, and the temperature is dropping." Patricia nodded vigorously, crossing her arms to ward off the freezing wind. "This is a marital asset. She cannot legally throw us out into the street without proper notice. Force her to open those doors right now." I did not panic. I simply reached into the side pocket of my wheelchair and pulled out a crisp, heavy legal document bearing the official seal of the state court. I handed it smoothly to the nearest police officer. "Officer, please review this," I said, my voice echoing with absolute surgical precision. "As I informed my husband earlier, this property is exclusively owned by a federally regulated blind trust. Neither Gavin nor his parents have ever been legal tenants, nor do they hold any marital claim to this estate. What you are holding is a 24-hour emergency eviction and trespass notice signed directly by a state judge just 1 hour ago. They are not residents. They are illegal trespassers." The officer scanned the document, his expression hardening. He turned to Richard and Patricia, resting his hand on his utility belt. "The paperwork is ironclad, folks. You have absolutely no legal right to be on this property. If you do not leave the premises immediately, I will arrest you both for criminal trespassing." The last shred of Patricia's arrogant entitlement completely evaporated. The reality of her absolute destitution crashed down upon her. She fell to her knees on the frozen concrete, her manicured hands gripping the icy steps. The woman who had marched into my home demanding the master bedroom, the woman who had laughed when her daughter slapped an innocent man, was now sobbing uncontrollably at my feet. "Gillian, please," Patricia begged, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "I am begging you. We have zero money. Our credit cards are declining everywhere. My friends will not answer my calls because of the news about Gavin. We are freezing. I am an old woman. You cannot do this to family. Have some mercy. Just let us sleep in the basement. I will clean. I will cook. Please show some compassion." I looked down at her, my expression utterly devoid of human warmth. I pressed the joystick on my wheelchair, rolling slightly forward, until I was looking directly into her tear-filled eyes. "Mercy," I repeated softly, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You want to talk to me about mercy, Patricia? Let us take a walk down memory lane. Do you remember exactly 4 years ago? Do you remember standing in that sterile, brightly lit hospice room while my mother was taking her final breaths?" Patricia froze, the blood draining completely from her tear-stained face. I was sitting by her bed, holding her fragile hand, watching the woman who gave me life slowly slip away. I continued, my voice cold enough to freeze the air between us. "You walked into that room wearing your expensive furs. You did not offer condolences. You did not bring comfort. You looked at my dying mother and you rolled your eyes. You told me I was wasting my time crying over a lost cause. You told me I was being a burden to Gavin and that I needed to hurry up, dry my tears, and go home to cook dinner for your precious son because he had had a long day at the office." Richard looked away, profound shame finally registering on his face. "You mocked my mother on her deathbed." I stated, the anger I had suppressed for 4 years finally unleashed in a wave of absolute devastation. "You treated my deepest agony as a minor inconvenience to your son's dinner schedule. You showed absolutely zero mercy when my world was ending. Do not you dare kneel on my property and beg for compassion you have never possessed." Patricia let out a loud, agonizing sob, burying her face in her freezing hands. She knew she was completely defeated. She knew the monster she had been was finally staring right back at her. Desperate and panicking, Richard pulled his smartphone from his coat pocket. His hands were shaking violently as he dialed a number he clearly had memorized. "I am calling Attorney Sterling." Richard stammered, his breath visible in the freezing air. "He has represented my firm for 30 years. He will fix this. He will file an injunction. We are wealthy people. We are not homeless." He put the phone on speaker, holding it out as if the lawyer's voice would serve as a magical shield against their destruction. The line rang twice before a sharp, deeply agitated voice answered. "Richard, do not speak. Just listen to me very carefully." Attorney Sterling snapped, his usual polished demeanor completely absent. "Sterling, thank God," Richard pleaded. "Listen, I need you to file an emergency injunction against my daughter-in-law. She is trying to throw us out into the street. Her trust documents are a sham. I need you to crush her." "Are you insane?" the lawyer roared through the speaker, the sheer panic in his voice echoing across the driveway. "I am not filing anything for you. I am officially dropping you as a client effective immediately. Do not ever call this number again." "What?" Richard gasped, nearly dropping the phone. "You cannot drop us. We pay you a massive retainer. We need your help right now." "There is no retainer left, Richard," Sterling fired back, his voice dropping into a harsh, terrified whisper. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation raided Gavin's tech offices 20 minutes ago. They just seized all of his corporate accounts, and the blast radius hit your personal finances. The feds have officially traced the fraudulent $500,000 wire transfer back to the servers your son used. But it gets worse. The investigators found financial links tying your personal retirement accounts to Gavin's shell companies. The FBI has officially opened a criminal investigation into you and Patricia as co-conspirators in a federal bank fraud and embezzlement ring." Richard's eyes widened to impossible proportions. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering onto the icy concrete, but the lawyer's final words still rang out loud and clear. "You are completely ruined, Richard. Every single asset you own is frozen pending federal seizure. The authorities are actively looking for you. If I were you, I would stop worrying about a place to sleep tonight and start figuring out how you are going to survive federal prison." The line clicked dead. The absolute silence that followed was the sound of an entire, arrogant dynasty crumbling into dust. The 60-inch flat-screen television in the living room illuminated Gavin's face in stark high definition. But he was not looking at a glowing business interview or a tech entrepreneur profile. He was staring at a continuous, brutal loop of his own hands wrapping aggressively around my throat. "Local venture capital director violently assaulted in her own home by her husband." The news anchor's voice echoed off the marble floors, sharp and entirely unforgiving. The chilling security footage shows Gavin Henderson attacking his wheelchair-bound wife, Gillian Henderson, mere days after she underwent major spinal surgery. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Patricia dropped her porcelain teacup. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending hot tea splashing across her designer shoes, but the sound was completely drowned out by the blaring television. Richard grabbed the remote control, his hands shaking violently as he changed the channel. The next network was broadcasting the exact same security footage. He changed it again. Channel 4, Channel 7, Channel 9. Every single evening broadcast featured Gavin's twisted, homicidal expression. He was everywhere. His rage was everywhere. His true face was everywhere. The polished visionary entrepreneur mask was gone forever, replaced by the undeniable, widely broadcast image of a domestic abuser attacking a vulnerable woman. "Turn it off!" Patricia shrieked, clutching her head and backing away from the screen. "This is a deep fake. Gillian fabricated this. Call your lawyer right now, Gavin. Tell them she altered the video to frame you." Gavin did not move. He could not move. He stood frozen in the middle of the room, still wearing the wrinkled clothes from his brief stint in the police holding cell before Richard had desperately bailed him out. "Mom, it is real!" Gavin whispered, his voice cracking into a pathetic wheeze. That is the footage from the foyer. The police already have it. But how did the news get it? The police do not release evidence this fast. I watched the absolute chaos unfold from the pristine silence of my fortified guest suite. My tablet displayed not only the living room security feed, but also the real-time analytics of the media release. My private public relations team had executed the launch with surgical perfection. They bypassed the local gossip blogs entirely. Instead, they sent the encrypted video files directly to top-tier investigative journalists and major news networks. They timed the release for exactly 5 o'clock in the evening, capturing the absolute peak of commuter traffic, social media scrolling, and dinnertime viewing. I did not just want Gavin arrested, I wanted his entire identity obliterated. I wanted his name to become a toxic liability. "You fool!" Richard roared, stepping forward and violently shoving his son's shoulder. "I paid $50,000 to bury that assault charge when you were in college so your record would be perfectly clean. I spent years building your reputation and hiding your temper, and you lose control on camera inside a smart home." Before Gavin could formulate an excuse, the true nightmare began. In the living room, the phones began to ring. It was not just one phone. Every single device in the room began vibrating and chiming simultaneously. Patricia's designer handbag shook frantically. Richard's breast pocket buzzed. Gavin's phone lit up on the glass coffee table like a warning beacon. Patricia answered hers, first stepping away from the television. "Hello, Margaret," she said, trying to force her voice into its usual country club cheerfulness. Her expression fell instantly, the fake smile melting off her face. "Margaret, please, it is a massive misunderstanding. The media is twisting things. Do not uninvite us. We have attended the Winter Charity Gala for a decade." She lowered the phone slowly, her face draining of all remaining blood. "Margaret just banned us from the country club," Patricia whispered, staring blankly at the wall. "She said the board of directors held an emergency vote 5 minutes ago. We are completely blacklisted. My friends are blocking my number." Richard pulled his phone from his pocket, reading a stream of incoming text messages. His shoulders slumped, and he suddenly looked like a very old, very fragile man. "My golf partners are canceling our weekend trip," he muttered, the reality of social exile crushing him. "The investment firm is sending me automated messages. They are asking me to step down from the advisory board effective immediately to avoid association with our family name." The 24-hour eviction notice I had served them earlier was bad enough. But this was absolute, immediate social execution. Their wealthy friends, their business partners, and their elite social circles were cutting ties with terrifying speed. Parasites always flee a dying host, and the Henderson family was officially toxic waste. But social execution was only the appetizer. The main course was strictly financial, and it was arriving right on schedule. Gavin stared blankly at the floor until a harsh, distinct chime broke his trance. It was a priority notification tone, a specific sound reserved exclusively for high-level corporate communications from his tech company's board of directors. He scrambled for his phone, his thumb slipping wildly on the glass screen. He opened the email marked as highly urgent. I zoomed in on the living room camera, watching his eyes dart back and forth across the text. His breathing stopped. His knees completely buckled, and he collapsed heavily onto the sofa, dropping the phone onto the coffee table. The screen remained brightly illuminated, displaying the bold, unapologetic text from his company's board of directors. It was not a request for an emergency meeting. It was not a suggestion for a temporary leave of absence. It was a formal, legally binding declaration of immediate termination. The email explicitly stated that Gavin Henderson was fired without severance. He was stripped of all corporate shares and voting rights due to a breach of the morality clause. Most devastatingly, the board announced they were officially naming him as the primary defendant in a massive upcoming corporate lawsuit demanding millions of dollars in restitution for the catastrophic reputational damage his public actions had inflicted upon their brand. The federal agents had permitted him one final supervised visit to collect his personal identification documents before his formal arraignment. Gavin walked through the heavy oak doors of my mansion, completely flanked by 2 stoic officers. The arrogant swagger of the visionary tech entrepreneur had entirely vanished. The polished, manipulative husband who had confidently paraded his pregnant mistress through my hallways was completely gone. In his place stood a hollow, trembling shell of a man. His designer clothes hung loosely on his shrinking frame. His face was a sickly, pale gray. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and darting around the grand foyer with frantic desperation. He stopped exactly in the center of the hallway. He looked down at the polished hardwood floor, and then he looked up at my wheelchair. This was the exact spot. This was the exact spot where he had thrown a heavy roll of paper towels directly at my face. This was the exact spot where he had demanded I clean up his family's mess while blood seeped through my fresh surgical bandages. This was the exact spot where he had tried to break my dignity. And now this was the exact spot where he completely shattered. Gavin's knees buckled. He did not simply kneel, he collapsed. He dropped to the hardwood floor with a heavy, pathetic thud. He threw his hands out, his fingers desperately gripping the rubber wheels of my chair. "Gillian, please," he sobbed, his voice cracking into a high, agonizing wail. "Please, I am begging you. You have to call the federal prosecutor. You have to tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. You have to drop the wire fraud charges. They are going to lock me in a federal penitentiary for 15 years. I will not survive in there. I will die in there. Please, you are my wife. I am your husband. You have to save me." He begged for his future. He begged for his freedom. He begged for a mercy he had never once shown me. The federal agents took a step forward to intervene, but I raised my hand slightly, signaling them to wait. I wanted to hear this. I needed to hear this. I needed to look down at the man who had caused me years of agonizing physical and emotional torment, and watch him experience the exact same helpless terror he had inflicted upon me. I stared down at him. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel a single drop of sorrow. I felt a cold, surgical clarity. "You want me to save you?" I asked, my voice echoing evenly off the vaulted ceilings. My tone was utterly devoid of human warmth. "You want me to save the man who pushed me down a flight of stairs and ruined my spine? You want me to save the man who stole my savings to fund his illegitimate child? You want me to save the man who brought his toxic family into my sanctuary to freeze me out and force me into absolute submission?" Gavin gasped for air, his chest heaving violently. "I was wrong," he cried, tears streaming rapidly down his cheeks, dripping onto the pristine floor. "I was so wrong, Gillian. I was blinded by greed. I was stressed. I was out of my mind. But I can change. I swear to you, I can change. I will do whatever you want. I will be the husband you deserve. Just please call your lawyer. Tell them I had your verbal authorization for the bank loan. Tell them it was a joint financial decision. Tell them anything. Just do not let them put me in a cage." His tears were entirely genuine, but they were not tears of remorse. They were not tears for the pain he had caused me. They were the desperate, pathetic tears of a narcissist finally facing the absolute, undeniable consequences of his own actions. He did not regret hurting me. He only regretted that he had failed to destroy me. "You are already in a cage, Gavin," I replied smoothly. "You built it yourself. You forged the documents. You signed the papers. You committed the federal crimes. I did not put you in this position. I simply refused to be your victim any longer." I reached into the side pocket of my wheelchair, the same pocket where I had hidden the toxicology report, the same pocket where I had hidden the encrypted USB drive. I pulled out a crisp, heavy manila envelope. Gavin looked up at the envelope, his bloodshot eyes widening with a sudden, desperate flicker of hope. He truly believed in his profound delusion that I was handing him a lifeline. He thought I was giving him a legal document that would somehow exonerate him. He thought I was finally yielding. I tossed the envelope. It fluttered through the quiet air of the foyer and landed directly on the floor, sliding right between his trembling hands. "Open it," I commanded, my voice slicing through his pathetic sobbing. Gavin scrambled to open the envelope, his fingers fumbling clumsily with the metal clasp. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. The top document was stamped with the official seal of the state court. The second document was a detailed, itemized financial invoice from a premier restoration company. "What is this?" he whispered, his eyes darting frantically across the bold legal text. "That is a unilateral petition for divorce," I stated, ensuring every single syllable hit him with maximum impact. "You will sign it immediately, relinquishing any and all claims to spousal support, or my corporate lawyers will financially bury you long before the federal government even puts you on trial." Gavin stared at the divorce decree, his last remaining shred of hope completely evaporating. And the other paper he choked out, holding up the itemized invoice. I smiled a sharp, unyielding expression. "That is an invoice for exactly $80,000. $80,000. Gavin repeated, his voice barely a breath. "For what?" "For the severe damages your grotesque family inflicted upon my property," I explained with chilling precision. "Your mother completely ruined my custom Persian wool rug by dragging her mud-encrusted boots across it, leaving permanent stains. Your sister intentionally scratched the imported mahogany dining table with her acrylic nails because she was throwing a temper tantrum over internet access. Your nephew completely destroyed the silk upholstery in the guest suite. Every single ruined item has been meticulously documented, photographed, appraised, and billed directly to you." I leaned forward in my wheelchair, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. "You have 48 hours to pay that $80,000 bill in full. If the funds are not cleared by Monday morning, I will add willful destruction of property and civil vandalism to your mounting list of criminal charges. I will ensure the judge factors that directly into your federal sentencing guidelines." Gavin knelt on the floor, the papers slipping from his numb fingers. He was completely broke. His accounts were entirely frozen by the FBI. He did not even have $80 to his name, let alone $80,000. He had absolutely no way to pay it, and he knew it. He was utterly trapped, cornered, and permanently defeated. "Look at me, Gavin," I demanded. He slowly raised his heavy head, his face a devastating portrait of absolute soul-crushing despair. "You called me barren," I whispered, my voice echoing with pure finality. "You called me weak. You called me a liability. But look around you. This is my house. This is my wealth. This is my absolute victory. You are nothing but a common criminal kneeling on my floor, begging for a life you no longer possess." I looked up and gave a single definitive nod to the federal agent standing behind him. "Take this trash out of my house," I said clearly. The agent stepped forward immediately. They grabbed Gavin by the arms, hauling his limp, sobbing body off my hardwood floor. He did not struggle. He did not fight back. He simply wept a long, agonizing wail of pure defeat as they dragged him out the front door and out of my life forever. The heavy oak door had barely clicked shut when a violent, chaotic commotion erupted on my front porch. The federal agents were forced to temporarily drag Gavin back into the center of my living room to maintain control of the escalating situation. Patricia and Richard had apparently followed the government convoy in a battered, cheap rental car. Desperate, freezing, and completely out of options, after being blacklisted by every social and financial circle in the city, they pushed past the exterior security and stumbled directly into my house. They looked absolutely horrific. Patricia's designer coat was stained with dirty city slush, her perfectly coiffed hair was a tangled, greasy mess, and her face was pale with profound exhaustion. Richard looked like a fragile, broken old man, his shoulders slumped and his eyes darting around with manic desperation. Patricia's eyes immediately locked onto the thick manila envelope crumpled in Gavin's handcuffed hands. She lunged forward like a starving animal, snatching it from his restricted grip. Her manicured fingers trembled violently as she ripped the envelope open, fully expecting to find a massive bank draft, a lucrative settlement agreement, or the $500,000 home equity funds. Instead, she pulled out the $80,000 itemized property damage invoice and the unilateral divorce decree. "Where is the bank draft?" Patricia shrieked frantically, shaking the empty envelope and turning it upside down until the legal papers scattered across the floor. "Where is the $500,000? You said you were coming here to negotiate a settlement. You said you were going to secure our retirement funds so we could hire federal defense attorneys." "There is no money, Mom," Gavin wailed, his voice echoing pathetically off the high vaulted ceilings. "The accounts are frozen permanently. Gillian hit me with an $80,000 property damage lawsuit. She is not dropping the charges. I have absolutely nothing left. I am going to federal prison. The remaining color drained entirely from Patricia's face. The realization that there was no secret safety net, no hidden cash, and no miraculous legal loophole finally crashed down upon her. And with that devastating realization, the unconditional maternal devotion she had always weaponized against me vanished in a split second. "You worthless, arrogant fool!" Patricia hissed, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She raised her hand and viciously slapped her golden child right across the face. The sharp smack silenced the entire room, leaving a bright red handprint on Gavin's pale cheek. "You dragged us into a federal bank fraud investigation. My country club friends will not even look at me. Our assets are frozen because you used our accounts to funnel your stolen money. You ruined my life." "Your life!" Richard roared, stepping forward and aggressively shoving his wife aside. "This is your fault, Patricia. You coddled him since the day he was born. You told him he was a visionary genius when his tech startup was bleeding cash. You demanded luxury vacations and expensive dinners we could not afford, which pushed him to take out that fraudulent loan to save face. You created this monster. Do not you dare blame me, Richard!" Patricia screamed back, her voice cracking into an ugly, hysterical pitch. "You are the one who told him to assert absolute dominance over Gillian. You told him to drain their joint savings accounts to pay off his underground gambling debts so your golf buddies would not find out. You stood by and enabled his cheating. You helped him hide his pregnant mistress in that luxury apartment." Gavin struggled against the federal agents holding his arms, his face red with fury and profound humiliation. "You are both greedy, disgusting parasites," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips as he glared at his parents. "You pushed me to do this. You wanted this mansion. You wanted the prestige. You happily spent Gillian's money for years drinking her expensive wine and sleeping in her guest rooms. The moment the well dries up and there are severe legal consequences, you turn your backs on me. You are far worse than I am." The scene unfolding right in the middle of my living room was a breathtaking masterpiece of poetic justice. The united, untouchable Henderson family dynasty was completely cannibalizing itself. They were screaming, cursing, and aggressively shoving one another, entirely stripped of their polished suburban facade. They looked exactly like feral animals fighting over the last scraps of a decaying carcass. All the loyalty, the strong family values, and the arrogant superiority they had paraded around for 6 years had evaporated into thin air. "I am testifying against you!" Richard yelled directly into his son's face, his veins bulging violently in his neck. "I will call the federal prosecutor the exact second I leave this house. I will tell them you forged Gillian's signatures completely alone. I am not spending the rest of my natural life in a federal penitentiary for your spectacular incompetence. I will drag you both down with me to the very bottom," Gavin shrieked, attempting to lunge at his father before the agents yanked him back forcefully. "I have the encrypted emails. I have the bank transfer receipts showing you willingly accepted the embezzled funds from the credit line. If I am wearing an orange jumpsuit in federal prison, you two will be sitting right in the cell next to me." The federal agents holding Gavin simply stood back, maintaining a professional, stoic distance as they watched the family tear each other to shreds. They had seen desperate criminals turn on each other before, but the sheer viciousness of this suburban family implosion was a spectacular sight in itself. I adjusted the heated blanket over my lap, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. For years, they had made me feel like the outsider, the ungrateful burden who was lucky to be associated with their prestigious bloodline. They had mocked my career, belittled my physical injuries, and defended the man who had nearly paralyzed me. Now the grand illusion was dead. The curtain had fallen on the Henderson family theater, and the actors were desperately trying to slit each other's throats before the final bow. Patricia dropped to her knees on the cold marble floor, exactly where her son had knelt moments earlier. She began tearing frantically at her own hair, sobbing hysterically, as the absolute certainty of her impending poverty, social exile, and incarceration finally broke her mind completely. Richard paced frantically in tight circles, muttering desperate legal defense strategies to himself like a deranged madman. Patricia slowly looked up at me, her expensive makeup completely ruined, dark mascara streaming down her face like toxic sludge. "Gillian, please," she choked out, reaching a shaking hand toward my wheelchair. "Tell them we did not know. Tell them we are innocent. We are family." I looked down at her, my eyes completely void of empathy. "Family does not steal from family, Patricia," I replied smoothly. "And family certainly does not help cover up a fraudulent $500,000 loan. You are not my family. You are a co-conspirator." Before Patricia could launch into another pathetic round of begging, the chaotic screaming and crying inside the living room was entirely drowned out by a deafening, terrifying sound originating from outside. The piercing, high-pitched wail of heavy sirens echoed aggressively down the quiet, snow-covered suburban street. It was not just one or two local police cruisers. It was a massive, highly coordinated convoy. Through the large bay windows, blinding red and blue strobe lights illuminated the living room, casting harsh, rapidly moving shadows across the terrified pale faces of my former in-laws. Heavy tires screeched violently against the icy pavement as multiple black, armored tactical SUVs swarmed my long driveway, completely blocking the exits and trapping Richard's rental car. The harsh, blinding glare of heavy searchlights flooded the front lawn, cutting through the winter darkness with aggressive, undeniable authority. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents and local police officers poured out of the vehicles, instantly forming a tight, impenetrable perimeter around my entire property. The thunderous voice of an FBI tactical commander boomed through a heavy megaphone, shaking the very foundation of the house, demanding that Richard and Patricia Henderson step outside immediately. The final nail in the coffin had arrived, and the ultimate reckoning was officially underway. The heavy oak doors were violently thrust open before Richard could even attempt to reach the handle. A flood of federal agents and local law enforcement poured into the grand foyer, their tactical boots thundering against the polished marble floor. The blinding glare of their high-intensity flashlights cut through the dim living room, casting harsh, terrifying shadows against the walls. The sheer force of their entry completely paralyzed Patricia and Richard, freezing them in place like cornered prey. Gavin stumbled backward, his hands raised instinctively in a pathetic display of surrender. The arrogance that had defined his entire existence evaporated in a single second. The visionary entrepreneur was gone. The demanding husband was gone. The entitled son was gone. In their place stood a terrified, trembling criminal who finally realized that his meticulously constructed house of cards had completely collapsed. Gavin Henderson, a lead FBI agent, announced, his voice slicing through the chaos with absolute, undeniable authority. "You are under arrest for federal bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and aggravated assault. Turn around and place your hands firmly behind your back." Two officers lunged forward, grabbing Gavin by the shoulders and forcefully spinning him around. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sharp, definitive snap. It was the sound of absolute finality. It was the sound of a carefully crafted illusion shattering. It was the sound of his future being entirely erased. Gavin's knees buckled under the crushing weight of reality. He fought against the officer's grip, his eyes darting frantically around the room in pure, unadulterated desperation. He begged the federal agents for a chance to explain. He begged his frozen parents for a lawyer. He begged me for a sliver of mercy. "Gillian, please!" Gavin screamed, his voice cracking into a raw, agonizing wail that tore through the freezing house. "Gillian, you have to stop them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I am your husband. I cannot go to prison. I will die in there. Please, Gillian, please." I sat perfectly still in my wheelchair, my expression utterly devoid of human sympathy. I watched the man who had shoved me down a flight of stairs break down. I watched the man who had mocked my paralysis break down. I watched the man who had tried to steal my hard-earned wealth break down into a sobbing, hysterical mess. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I simply watched the severe consequences of his own vile actions swallow him whole, take him out, the lead agent commanded. As the officers dragged Gavin's limp, thrashing body toward the front door, The blinding red and blue strobe lights from the convoy illuminated a second scene unfolding directly in my driveway. Through the massive bay windows, Patricia and Richard witnessed the absolute destruction of their remaining pride. Pinned against the side of a separate police cruiser drenched in the freezing winter slush was Brittany. She was already in handcuffs, her expensive silk pajamas soaked and ruined. Local detectives had executed the warrant for her massive embezzlement scheme simultaneously. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her mascara running down her pale cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. The sister who had violently slapped her honest husband, the sister who had gleefully spent stolen company funds on a young fitness trainer, was now facing her own devastating reality. Patricia let out a guttural, primal scream. Her hands flew to her face as she watched both of her golden children, the pride of her toxic legacy, being shoved forcefully into the back of police vehicles. Her entire world, her status, her financial safety net, and her arrogant superiority had been completely obliterated in a matter of minutes. "Ma'am, step away from the window," a local officer instructed, stepping between Patricia and the glass. "We need to clear this property immediately. You and your husband are not the legal owners of this residence, and you have been officially served with a judicial eviction notice. You are trespassing." Richard's jaw dropped. "Officer, be reasonable," he stammered, his hands shaking violently. "Our children are being arrested. It is freezing outside. We have absolutely zero money and nowhere to go. You cannot just throw us out into the cold street. We are respectable people." The officer remained entirely unmoved. "The legal homeowner has exercised her right to remove unauthorized occupants. Grab your belongings and exit the premises now, or you will be placed under arrest for criminal trespassing." They had absolutely no choice. Trembling with cold and profound humiliation, Patricia and Richard grabbed the handles of their mud-encrusted suitcases. They dragged their heavy luggage toward the front door, their footsteps slow and heavy with the absolute certainty of their ruin. They walked past me without saying a single word, their eyes fixed firmly on the floor. They had marched into my home days ago, acting like untouchable royalty, demanding my master bedroom and treating me like hired help. Now, they were being marched out like common criminals. The officers escorted them out onto the freezing snow-covered driveway. The winter wind howled viciously, biting through their thin, expensive coats. But the freezing temperature was not the worst part of their punishment. The commotion, the screaming, and the massive fleet of police vehicles had woken up the entire affluent neighborhood. The heavy front doors of the surrounding multi-million-dollar mansions had opened. My wealthy, highly influential neighbors stood on their pristine porches, clutching their warm coats, pointing and staring directly at the spectacle. They watched Gavin and Brittany being hauled away in disgrace. They watched Patricia and Richard, stripped of their arrogant pride, standing in the icy street with their cheap luggage. The family that had cared so deeply about social status, the family that had relentlessly judged everyone around them, was now the main attraction of a humiliating neighborhood-wide scandal. Patricia covered her face with her trembling hands, unable to bear the searing weight of the judgmental stares. Richard stood completely frozen, his shoulders slumped in ultimate, undeniable defeat. They were entirely broke. They were utterly exposed. They were completely abandoned. They had no children left to fund their lavish lifestyle, no credit cards to swipe, and absolutely no remaining dignity to shield them from the cold reality of their choices. I sat in the comforting warmth of my grand foyer, watching the police cruisers finally pull away, leaving my former in-laws stranded in the freezing dark. I pressed the button on my smart home application, and the heavy oak doors swung shut, sealing them outside forever. The silence that filled my house was beautiful. The revenge was absolute. The justice was finally perfectly served. They walked to the city bus stop, desperate for any kind of shelter from the brutal winter storm, but the driver took one look at their massive designer suitcases and demanded exact fare. Patricia fumbled frantically through her expensive leather purse, pulling out a handful of platinum credit cards that had all been permanently frozen by federal authorities. She practically begged the driver, attempting to leverage her old social status loudly, claiming she was a prominent country club member who had simply misplaced her cash. The driver bluntly refused them entry, stating he was not running a charity service, and shut the heavy glass doors right in their faces. The massive city bus roared away, its heavy tires splashing a deep puddle of freezing, dirty street water directly onto Patricia's pristine designer winter coat. They were forced to turn around and trudge aimlessly down the cracked sidewalk under the relentless freezing drizzle. The wheels of Richard's heavy leather suitcase snagged on a broken piece of concrete and snapped off completely with a sharp crack. He let out a loud, frustrated scream, violently kicking the broken luggage and cursing his son's name into the empty street. Patricia was sobbing hysterically now, her expensive makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. The woman who had proudly mocked my dying mother, the woman who had demanded my master bedroom while I was recovering from a brutal spinal surgery, was now shivering on a dark street corner with absolutely nowhere to go. Passing cars illuminated their miserable, drenched figures, but absolutely no one stopped to help. They were completely toxic waste. The local evening news had already broadcast the leaked FBI documents showing Patricia's own signature on the fraudulent bank transfers Gavin had initiated. She had desperately tried to play the innocent weeping mother for the cameras earlier that afternoon outside my gates. But a ruthless investigative journalist had shoved the financial statements right in her face on live television. Her social destruction was absolute and permanent. Every single wealthy friend, golf partner, and country club associate had blocked their numbers. I watched the entire pathetic sequence unfold from the comforting warmth of my living room. I sat in my wheelchair, a soft cashmere blanket draped over my healing legs, holding a steaming mug of Earl Grey tea. The 60-inch flat-screen television mounted on the wall replayed the glorious high-definition footage of Gavin being shoved into the back of an unmarked federal vehicle. The news anchor then transitioned to the segment about Patricia and Richard, highlighting their direct involvement in the massive real estate embezzlement scheme and their subsequent eviction into the winter storm. I took a slow, highly satisfied sip of my tea. The roaring fire in the hearth cast a warm, golden glow across my custom Persian rug. The house was perfectly, beautifully silent. There were no entitled in-laws complaining about the temperature or demanding gourmet meals. There was no treacherous husband plotting to drug me and steal my hard-earned wealth. There were no fake nurses parading their illegitimate pregnancies in my face. The sheer tranquility of my heavily fortified, legally untouchable sanctuary was the greatest reward I could have ever asked for. My smartphone buzzed on the glass coffee table, breaking the quiet. It was Attorney Davis calling with my final legal update for the evening. He informed me that Gavin had officially been denied bail by the federal judge. The prosecutor was pushing for a 15-year maximum sentence, citing the undeniable video evidence of his physical intimidation, his attempt to forcefully sedate me, and his massive wire fraud against a federal entity. Gavin was currently sitting in a cold concrete holding cell, entirely stripped of his tailored suits and his bloated ego. The updates on the rest of the parasites were equally satisfying. Brittany was currently sitting in a county jail cell, weeping uncontrollably as Terrence finalized their divorce and handed all of her financial records over to the corporate fraud department. She was facing years in state prison for embezzling from his construction firm. Kendra, the 23-year-old mistress, had immediately flipped on Gavin to save herself, signing a full confession in exchange for a lighter sentence. She was now facing the harsh reality of being a single mother with a felony grand larceny record completely cut off from the luxurious lifestyle Gavin had falsely promised her. And my unilateral divorce papers had already been expedited and filed with the state court, ensuring Gavin would never see a single penny of my venture capital portfolios or my trust assets. I thanked Attorney Davis for his exceptional work and ended the call. I looked around my beautiful, quiet home, feeling a profound sense of physical and emotional relief. My spine still ached from the fusion surgery, but the pain was manageable now, fading away, just like the toxic presence of the Henderson family. For years, I had allowed Gavin to dim my light. I had allowed his terrible family to disrespect me foolishly, believing that keeping the peace and being the bigger person was the duty of a good wife. But keeping the peace with selfish, greedy people only guarantees your own eventual destruction. When Gavin pushed me down those stairs and cost me my unborn child, he thought he had broken my spirit entirely. When he and his parents invaded my home, they truly thought they had conquered me. But they severely underestimated the quiet, calculated, and absolute strength of a woman who has been pushed past her breaking point. I did not just survive their massive betrayal. I orchestrated their total annihilation using absolutely nothing but their own greed, arrogance, and entitlement against them. I handed them the rope and they happily tied their own nooses. I smiled, turning off the television and listening to the crackling fire. The parasites were gone. The financial trap had snapped shut perfectly, and my new peaceful life was finally ready to begin. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to stand your ground and fight back against toxic family members who tried to destroy you, always remember that your greatest revenge is your own success and your absolute refusal to be a victim. The silence of the mansion was no longer heavy or oppressive. It was light, breathable, and utterly magnificent. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed softly, marking the end of the most chaotic 24 hours of my life. I sat in my wheelchair facing the roaring gas fireplace, listening to the gentle crackle of the flames. The high-definition television was turned off. The security feeds displayed a clear, empty perimeter. The long, snow-covered driveway was completely devoid of police cruisers, federal vehicles, and the mud-encrusted rental cars of my former in-laws. The smart lock on the front door engaged with a soft electronic hum, followed by the sound of heavy boots stepping onto the entryway mat. Footsteps echoed across the marble foyer, calm and measured. Attorney Davis stepped into the living room carrying his signature leather briefcase. He took off his thick winter coat, draped it neatly over a dining chair, and let out a long, highly satisfied sigh. He looked around the pristine space entirely free of the entitlement, greed, and noise that the Henderson family had dragged in just 2 days prior. They denied him bail, Attorney Davis announced, taking a seat on the plush sofa opposite me. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of stamped legal filings. The federal judge watched the security footage of him attempting to force those heavy sedatives down your throat. The prosecutor argued he was an extreme flight risk and a violent danger to a vulnerable dependent. He is staying in federal lockup until the trial, and given the massive amount of video evidence we provided, the district attorney expects a very quick conviction. I smiled. It was not the tight-guarded smile I had been forcing for the past 48 hours. It was a genuine, radiant expression that reached all the way to my eyes. I reached down and unclipped the thick nylon safety belt of the wheelchair. I grabbed the heavy heated blanket that had covered my legs all week and tossed it effortlessly onto the floor. I planted both of my feet firmly on the custom Persian rug. Then, with absolute ease, perfect balance, and zero hesitation, I stood up. I raised my arms high above my head, stretching my torso to the left, then to the right. My spine moved with fluid, painless grace. I rolled my shoulders back, letting out a deep breath as my joints cracked satisfyingly. I bent down and touched my toes, feeling the familiar, comforting stretch in my hamstrings. There was no agonizing pain. There was no risk of paralysis. There was no need for the wheelchair at all. You have absolutely no idea how incredibly stiff my legs are from sitting in that chair playing the victim for 2 days straight, I said, walking smoothly over to the wet bar to pour us both a glass of celebratory scotch. My heels clicked sharply and confidently against the hardwood floor. Attorney Davis chuckled, accepting the crystal glass I handed him. Your performance was worthy of an Academy Award, Gillian. Even knowing the absolute truth, watching the live feed from your hidden cameras and seeing him grab your jaw had my heart racing. I almost called the police early. I took a slow sip of the amber liquid, feeling it warm my chest. The truth was, my spinal surgery had not happened 5 days ago. It had happened exactly 35 days ago. And it was not a brutal open back fusion that required months of agonizing recovery and bed rest. It was a highly exclusive, state-of-the-art, minimally invasive laser procedure performed by a top-tier private specialist in Switzerland. I had walked out of the pristine Alpine clinic the very next morning, and within 3 weeks, I was completely back to my normal physical routine. By the time I returned to New York, I was fully healed, perfectly mobile, and armed with a singular, devastating plan. I bought the motorized wheelchair with cash. I ordered medical-grade theatrical blood to soak into the fake gauze pads I taped to my lower back every morning. I filled my prescription bottles with generic daily vitamins. I constructed a flawless, undeniable illusion of absolute physical vulnerability. I had to know, I said, pacing smoothly across the living room floor, relishing the feeling of unrestricted movement. I knew Gavin was stealing money to fund his fake tech startup. I suspected he was hiding an affair. But I needed to know exactly how far his cruelty extended. I needed to see what he would do when he thought I was entirely helpless, broken, and a massive burden to his lavish lifestyle. If I was healthy and strong, he would have just kept lying to my face and quietly siphoning funds in the shadows. Attorney Davis nodded in agreement, taking a sip of his scotch. If you had confronted him while healthy, he would have played the victim perfectly. He would have dragged out a civil divorce for years, hiding his assets, demanding exorbitant alimony, and fighting for half of this estate. He would have used his parents to launch a vicious smear campaign against you to protect his reputation. It would have been a messy, exhausting civil dispute. Exactly, I replied, sitting down on the sofa and crossing my legs elegantly. But by pretending to be incapacitated, I gave him the ultimate temptation. I handed him the illusion of absolute power. I knew his greed and his massive ego would override whatever tiny shred of caution he possessed. He truly thought he could drug a paralyzed woman, forge a medical power of attorney, and steal a $3 million estate without a single consequence. And by doing so, Attorney Davis added, tapping his silver pen against the documents, he escalated a standard divorce into a massive federal criminal indictment. Forcing a medically incapacitated person to sign financial documents under the threat of physical violence is a severe felony. The fact that he believed you were heavily medicated triggers enhanced penalty statutes for abusing a disabled spouse. Add the forged signatures on the blind trust loan, the federal wire fraud, and the grand larceny committed by his mistress, and you have handed the authorities a perfectly wrapped conviction. I looked at the empty space by the entryway where Patricia and Richard had stood just hours ago, shivering and terrified. Gavin completely destroyed his own life, I noted coldly. And his family eagerly proved they were just as rotten as he is. They watched a man admit to pushing his wife down the stairs. They watched him flaunt his pregnant mistress. And their only concern was securing a comfortable bedroom for themselves and getting a piece of my wealth. They defended his crimes. They enabled his greed. Now they had absolutely nothing. Their golden son was facing a decade behind bars. Their daughter was sitting in a county jail cell for embezzling from her own husband. Patricia and Richard had been evicted into a freezing winter storm, publicly humiliated on the evening news, and stripped of every financial resource they had leached off my hard work. They were social pariahs facing potential federal investigations into their own complicity with Gavin's stolen funds. I walked over to the wheelchair, sitting in the center of the room. I gripped the handles firmly, pushed it toward the hallway closet, folded it up effortlessly, and shoved it into the dark corner where it belonged. The prop had served its purpose perfectly. The trap had worked flawlessly. The monster I married had unmasked himself for the hidden cameras sealing his own permanent destruction. I walked back to the center of my beautiful, perfectly quiet living room and raised my glass to my lawyer. To the new chapter, I said, the crystal clinking sharply in the quiet room. The trash has finally taken itself out. 6 months later, those exact words echoed in my mind as I sat in the back of my chauffeured car, glancing at the financial news playing on the mounted screen. The anchor's voice was crisp and clinical, delivering the final verdict that officially closed the darkest chapter of my life. Gavin Henderson, the former visionary tech entrepreneur, had just been sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The screen flashed a courtroom sketch of my ex-husband. His face was drawn and gaunt, completely stripped of the arrogant smirk he used to wear so proudly. He looked like a hollow, terrified shell. Beside him, his sister Brittany received her own devastating sentence. 5 years in a state facility for grand larceny and corporate embezzlement. The judge had shown absolutely zero leniency, citing their complete lack of remorse and the highly calculated nature of their financial crimes. The broadcast cut to raw footage outside the federal courthouse. Patricia and Richard were shuffling down the concrete steps, desperately trying to shield their faces from the flashing cameras of the local press. They looked entirely unrecognizable. Patricia's expensive designer clothes had been replaced by a faded, ill-fitting coat, and her perfectly styled hair was now thin and graying. Richard walked with a heavy, defeated limp, carrying a cheap, plastic shopping bag. With all their assets seized by the federal government to pay for Gavin and Brittany's legal restitution and their elite social circle permanently blocking their calls, they had been forced to move into a crumbling, low-income apartment complex on the dangerous outskirts of the city. The entitled people who had once marched into my home, demanded my master bedroom, and mocked my dying mother were now facing their twilight years in absolute destitution. They were entirely reliant on government assistance, completely abandoned by the high society they had worshipped and forced to look over their shoulders every single day. I turned off the screen with a single press of a button. I did not feel pity. I did not feel anger. I felt nothing but the clean, sharp sensation of absolute poetic justice. The car pulled up to the curb and my driver quickly opened the door. I stepped out onto the bustling pavement of Wall Street. I was not sitting in a wheelchair. I was not wrapped in a thick, heated blanket or wearing medical gauze. I was standing tall, wearing a striking, immaculately tailored crimson-red power suit that commanded immediate attention. The sharp, rhythmic click of my designer heels against the pavement felt like a victory march. Every step I took was a testament to my survival, my strategic brilliance, and my complete physical and financial autonomy. I walked through the revolving glass doors of a massive corporate high-rise, bypassing the security desk with a brief nod to the guards who knew my face well. I stepped into the private elevator, swiping my keycard to access the top floor. The doors slid open to reveal a sprawling glass-walled boardroom overlooking the entire Manhattan skyline. The room was filled with a dozen older, highly aggressive corporate executives. They were the key players in a massive hostile corporate merger, and they had spent the last 3 weeks trying to intimidate me into accepting a significantly lower valuation for my latest acquisition. They severely underestimated the woman sitting across from them. If I could systematically dismantle an entire family of parasitic manipulators while pretending to be paralyzed, a room full of arrogant bankers was nothing but child's play. I took my seat at the head of the long mahogany table. I opened my leather briefcase, pulled out the final contract, and slid it directly to the lead executive. The valuation stands at $120 million. I stated, my voice ringing with absolute unforgiving authority. I am not entertaining counteroffers. I am not discussing alternative equity splits. You have exactly 5 minutes to sign those papers, or I walk away and take this intellectual property directly to your largest international competitor. The executives exchanged panicked glances. They blustered, they whispered frantically among themselves, and they tried to negotiate. But my expression remained completely carved in stone. I did not blink. I did not soften. I simply watched the clock. Within 4 minutes, the lead executive sighed heavily, pulled out his gold fountain pen, and signed his name on the dotted line. The $100 million deal was officially closed. As the defeated executives packed their briefcases and filed out of the boardroom in silent submission, a familiar deep laugh echoed from the far corner of the room. Terrence stepped out of the shadows looking sharper and healthier than I had ever seen him. He was wearing a custom-tailored navy suit, his broad shoulders relaxed, and his dark eyes shining with genuine pride. After successfully divorcing Brittany and handing her meticulous financial records over to the authorities, Terrence had retained full ownership of his construction company. Unburdened by her toxic spending and constant belittling, he had expanded his business massively, securing highly lucrative commercial contracts across the entire East Coast. When I needed a reliable visionary infrastructure partner for this massive new corporate venture, Terrence was the very first person I called. We had both survived the Henderson family's poison, and we had both emerged infinitely stronger. You absolutely destroyed them out there, Gillian Terrence said, walking over to the private wet bar tucked into the corner of the executive boardroom. He pulled out 2 crystal flutes and opened a bottle of premium vintage champagne. The cork popped with a joyous, echoing crack that filled the empty room. They thought they had the upper hand, I replied smoothly, standing up and walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows to look down at the bustling city below. People always make the fatal mistake of confusing silence with weakness. Terrence walked over and handed me a crystal flute, the golden liquid bubbling perfectly inside. He stood beside me, looking out at the empire we were both building. He clinked his glass against mine, the sound crisp and clear. To new beginnings, Terrence said, a warm, genuine smile spreading across his face. To leaving the dead weight behind, and to the absolute best business partner a man could ever ask for. To absolute independence, I replied, raising my glass higher. I took a slow sip of the cold, crisp champagne. I looked at my reflection in the massive glass window. I saw a woman who had been pushed down a flight of stairs, mocked, betrayed, and targeted for complete financial ruin. But that woman had not broken. She had transformed into an unstoppable force of nature. Gavin and his family were currently rotting in prison cells and slum apartments, suffocating under the heavy, inescapable weight of their own karma. Meanwhile, I was standing at the absolute top of the world, bathed in the bright morning sunlight, ready to conquer whatever came next. The sweet taste of revenge was gone, replaced entirely by the even sweeter, permanent taste of absolute freedom.